Chapter 160. Although Zhang Yan had killed Lu Gu, he had always been careful and didn't want to make any mistakes. Not only did he personally search Lu Jiyi's body, he also went to various places to look for the magic weapons that Lu Gu had left behind. With his memory, he naturally didn't miss any of them. He only stopped when he was sure that Lu Gu could no longer be in this world. However, after returning to the demon treasury, he still had a question in his mind. He walked around the first floor of the demon treasury and suddenly looked up. He saw that there was a palm-sized jade disc in the middle of the ceiling. It was engraved with densely packed characters. After looking at it for a while, he found that the content of the jade disc was exactly the same as the description on the jade slip. With a thought, a sword light flew up and slashed. There was a dang sound, but the jade pendant was still as smooth as before. There wasn't even a mark left on it. He had a look of understanding on his face as he nodded and said, "I see." He originally thought that according to the thoughts of people like Lu Gu, once he obtained this technique, he would definitely think of a way to destroy it after memorizing it. Why would he leave it here? Now it seemed that the technique was carved here and couldn't be destroyed. It would be a waste of effort to tamper with it. This demon treasury was an item of inheritance, so it was reasonable for it to have such an arrangement. Zhang Yan slowly retracted his gaze and let go of his thoughts. This way, he could cultivate this technique with peace of mind. No one knew where the true origin of this technique came from. Whether it was the original book or the Jade Scroll, they were both vague and vague. With just a few strokes, it was only called Enlightened Path Comprehending Divine Contract. It was a technique to achieve strength. Once this technique was completed, one's body was harder than metal and even divine weapons couldn't hurt it. However, this technique only involved the first 3 stages, which corresponded to the enlightened Qi, mystic light, and core transformation realms. In order to cultivate this technique, one had to first refine the 9 absorption demon scroll hidden here. After taking this magic treasure for one's own use, when facing an enemy, if the opponent lost the ability to resist, he only needed to suck in the essence, qi, and spirit of the opponent. From then on, every time he killed a person, the magic slip would spit out a small amount of essence qi to feed back to its owner. With this strand of pure essence qi circulating within his body, he would be able to continue cultivating this technique. The more cultivators it killed, the more powerful the devil's slip would be, and the more essence qi it would absorb. Zhang Yan sighed in his heart. The killing intent of this technique was extremely heavy. As expected of the secret teachings of the devil sect, the warning on the stone tablet about the impending calamity was not without reason. However, although this method was cruel, he had a reason to practice it. When a cultivator who achieved the Tao with Qi condensed his Dan, one of the 3 medicines mentioned above was called leakless wind. The wind came and went without a trace. When a cultivator condensed a pill, it was born from within the pill. If the cultivator failed to hide it, the grade of the pill would drop by a level. However, the body of a cultivator of the Qi Tao was not strong, and their acupoints were not closed. Once the wind came out, it would mostly leak out from the acupoints and pores. No matter how good one's Xian technique was, no matter how good one's talent was, there was nothing they could do. Only a cultivator who had a great opportunity could lock it in. Zhang Yan was not willing to place his hopes on such an illusory opportunity. Thus, he secretly thought that as long as he cultivated this enlightened Tao to divinity contract, he would only need to reach the 2nd stage. His entire body would be like one piece, and he would be able to protect the wind from leaking out. Just this benefit alone made it impossible for him to give up on this technique. Zhang Yan thought for a bit. He did not find the 9 absorption demon scroll on Lu Jiyi's body earlier, so it should still be in this demon treasury. If it wasn't on the 1st floor, then he could only go up and search. A wisp of smoke rose from his feet and slowly carried him from the entrance of the stairs to the 2nd floor. There were banners hung on all 4 sides, pearls were embedded in the walls, and the floor was covered in colored glass. Looking at it, it was shining brightly like a mirror. In the middle was a cauldron of 3 beasts hugging a pill. The cauldron lid was thrown to the side, and wisps of nether chi rose from the cauldron. In the air, there was a demon scroll that was a foot long and was surrounded by black fiendish chi. Zhang Yan thought to himself, this must be the 9 absorption demon subduing slip. He raised his hand and pointed, injecting a strand of spiritual chi into it. The jade scroll trembled, and a thought was immediately transmitted over. He analyzed it for a bit and found out that this was a strand of Lu Jiyi's remnant obsession. With just a touch, he saw Lu Jiyi's thoughts when he was refining this demon scroll. This demon scroll originally had 33 restrictions. Lu Gu had refined it for 32 years, watering it with the nether chi of the lower 3 floors of the sticks every day. There was still one more restriction that he had yet to unlock. But for some reason, even though he could use it roughly, he still could not remove it from the cauldron. He thought that it was because his luck had not come yet. But at this moment, he could not wait to practice this technique, so he could only think of something else. According to the Jade Scroll, the enlightened way comprehending divine contract was the best for stealing the essence of demonic cultivators. Even though there were no demonic cultivators here, there was the Agarwood sect. That was why Lu Gu did not hesitate to spread some of the shallow techniques in the demon treasury, hoping to trick a few disciples of the Agarwood sect into coming here so that he could take them as his seeds. At first, the Agarwood sect had a core transformation cultivator in charge, so he was still careful. Even if no one came, he did not dare to act rashly. Later, the previous leader, Red Flower Fairy, was plotted against by him, and died after returning. At this time, he became bolder, intending to make the entire Agarwood sect practice demonic techniques. When these people reached perfection, he would bring them all here, and use the 9 absorption demon scroll to absorb their essence, chi, and spirit, to help him practice this technique. These thoughts flashed through Zhang Yan's mind, but he shook his head. This Lu Gu was too stingy. Although he didn't know exactly how much essence the jade slip could produce, it definitely couldn't be too much. Otherwise, the stone tablet on the first level wouldn't be called tribulation. There were so many demonic cultivators in the world, but they did not dare to go out to search, and only stared at the mere few hundred people of the Agarwood sect. What use could they be? Presumably, the sword of the Shaoqing sect disciple not only severed his Tao foundation, but also broke the spirit in his heart. Zhang Yan looked at the magic scroll a few times, his eyes flashing. Since the demon trove had fallen into his hands, how could it be confined to this corner of the world? Thinking of this, he faintly snorted, and with a wave of his hand, that trace of Lu Jiyi's remaining essence was dissolved. Then he raised his hand and pointed. A sharp spiritual light brought his thoughts into the magic scroll. As if it felt his thoughts, the magic scroll suddenly buzzed and vibrated. The nether energy in the furnace below also surged and surged, gathering into the scroll. Not long after, the nether energy in the furnace was sucked clean. But the magic scroll seemed to think that it was not enough, and kept vibrating in the air, sucking in more nether energy from outside the demon trove. But the water of the river Styx had long been refined by Zhang Yan. Once the water was gone, the nether energy also began to dissipate. Now that there was only a little left, how could it withstand such a devouring? Seeing this, Zhang Yan smiled. Fine, I'll lend you a hand today. Zhang Ju, come out. Mountain River Child responded, and Zhang Yan pointed, give it all the nether energy you've absorbed, no need to be stingy. Mountain River Child immediately responded. He slowly poured out the nether energy that had been absorbed from the Mountain River diagram for a year. Suddenly receiving nourishment from the nether energy, the demonic slip seemed to be extremely excited. It let out a strange whistling sound, no matter how much nether energy it absorbed. It was as if it had turned into an endless abyss, sucking in all of it. After about an hour, a melodious heavenly sound rang out, and the black energy around the magic scroll dissipated, revealing its original appearance. It had a jade-like luster. It was as smooth as white fat, and immortal energy lingered around it. The top and bottom were decorated with gold and silver. Not only was there no demonic energy, but it looked very good. Anyone who saw it would say that it was an immortal's treasure. Zhang Yan raised his hand. The magic scroll did not resist, and fell into his palm. He probed it with his mind, and felt that there was a stark contrast between the inside and outside of the magic scroll. There was a monstrous killing intent coming from the depths of the magic scroll, and it kept drilling into his mind, as if it wanted to drive him to kill all the cultivators in the world. Zhang Yan smiled, and with a thought, he suppressed this bloodlust. He had already made up his mind on how to cultivate this technique, and when to cultivate it. How could he allow himself to be controlled by a jade slip? Although this technique was for plundering and killing, if he only knew how to blindly do it, he would not be able to cultivate it, and he would be attacked by everyone. What's more, he only had the first 3 levels of this technique. More profound techniques would probably have to be found in the higher levels of the demon treasury, and he was far from being able to be unbridled. He put the 9 subduing devil slip into his sleeve and flew towards the 3rd level. The 3rd level was different from the 2nd. Candles were high, and the floor was paved with green bricks. Water flowed through the cracks, and there was a token hanging on all 4 sides. In the middle, there was a stone platform, and there was nothing else. Zhang Yan walked closer to take a look, and found that the platform looked like an altar. There was a concave shape on the surface, and it looked very familiar. He raised his eyebrows and looked at it. Then, he seemed to have thought of something. He took out the magic treasure that teleported him to the 7 ultimate devouring information from his sleeve. After comparing it with the magic treasure, he discovered that it was indeed taken from the formation. He couldn't help but think, could it be that this item isn't used to teleport people, but to teleport the demon treasury? But why didn't Lu Gu refine it? He didn't know that in order to enter the demon treasury, Lu Gu had put in a lot of effort. Back then, he came here with severe injuries, and just to enter the 2nd level, he spent 18 years. After that, he recovered a little, but it still took him 14 years to reach the 3rd level. When Zhang Yan, Mu Hongchen, and the rest came down here, he had only obtained this fish plate for a few days. How could he have had the time to refine this item? Since this demon treasury could be used for teleportation, Zhang Yan didn't stand on ceremony, and immediately sat down to refine it. This item looked like a Xian artifact, but it didn't have any true consciousness in it, so refining it was effortless. After a month, he opened his eyes, picked up the item, and buckled it into the concave. Spiritual qi surged into it, and it turned into a clear jade spring. In an instant, the fish on the plate seemed to have a life of its own, and its body was covered with scales and thin whiskers. It shook its head and wagged its tail, and it was quite magical. Zhang Yan let out a roar, and with a rumbling sound, the devil trove was teleported 3,000 meters away. Zhang Yan couldn't help but be delighted. He pushed the devil trove a few more times, and before long, the sky brightened. After being trapped in the underground ravine for a year, he returned to the surface. Chapter 161. After being away for a year, Zhang Yan finally saw the light of day again. He felt like he could fly up to the clouds and swim around freely. It was just that this flying pavilion was too eye-catching, so he chanted a spell and put it into his sleeve. But at this moment, the sword pill between his eyebrows suddenly jumped, and a strange feeling arose in his heart. He furrowed his brows, sensing that someone was hiding nearby and spying on him. However, that feeling was fleeting. He swept his gaze across the surroundings. Other than a few barren hills, there was only a boundless grassland. He didn't discover anything else. After thinking about it carefully, he guessed that someone was using a magic treasure to spy on him from afar. Within a radius of thousands of miles, there was only one Taoist sect, Agarwood sect, and they were the only ones who were specifically looking for the entrance to the river Styx. A year ago, there were 3 people from the Agarwood sect who went to the river Styx with Zhang Yan. However, Ni Qianying secretly followed them and tried to steal the demonic treasury first. In the end, she was captured by Lu Gu. Now that Mu Hongchen was killed by Lu Gu, and the essence of the other 2 girls was absorbed by the 9 absorption magic slip, they probably didn't even have their bones left. But Lu Gu admitted that he let one of the girls go. He didn't know who she was, but she must have been instructed by Lu Gu to control the entire Agarwood sect, and then change the sect to Devil's Sect, so that they could absorb essence, qi, and spirit in the future. Zhang Yan was almost sure that the one who spied on him was this girl. He immediately thought that this girl couldn't be left alive. Actually, he didn't care what happened to Agarwood's sect. No matter what, it was their sect's business. What did it have to do with him? Moreover, with his identity as a disciple of a big sect, there was nothing wrong with obtaining a devil's trove. No one would say anything about him. Instead, they would praise him for his great fortune. But after reading Enlightened Tao Comprehending Divine Contract, he knew that this technique was not to be underestimated. This girl had seen the devil's trove. If someone happened to deduce its origin from its appearance, it would definitely cause endless trouble. Therefore, he had to clean up this mess. At the same time, Ni Qianying, who was sitting cross-legged in the Agarwood hall, suddenly threw away the bronze mirror in her hand. A month ago, she suddenly felt that the restriction technique that Lu Gu had set up in her body had disappeared. At that time, she was both surprised and delighted, making wild guesses. But without being summoned, she didn't dare to take the initiative to investigate. She thought about it and didn't know what to do. When Lu Gu sent her out, he gave her a 100 miles smoke and dust mirror. When she held it in her hand, she could see the scenery dozens of miles away. Therefore, she scanned the entrance and exit of the sticks every day, hoping to find some clues. She never thought that she would see this scene today. She had thought that Zhang Yan had already died in the sticks. Who would have thought that he would actually come out alive, and even Lu Ji's devil treasury had fallen into his hands. She secretly guessed that Lu Gu was either dead or had escaped. Otherwise, how could he have allowed Zhang Yan to come out alive with the devil's treasury? But thinking of this, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. She thought to herself, not good, when I was spying on Zhang Yan, I seem to have been discovered. Will he come to kill me? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but secretly regret. At this time, she heard an urgent report from outside. Sect Master, someone has broken into the hall, and Ni Qianying was frightened. She had already seen Zhang Yan's figure from afar. Her face couldn't help but turn pale. She knew that things were not good. Her brain worked very quickly. She bit her lip and stood up, shouting to the dozen female disciples standing in the hall, "This is the person who killed Marshal Nephew Mu. Disciples, help me stop him." After saying this, she shook her hand and threw out a golden ring, directly hitting Zhang Yan's face. Then, without looking back, she turned around and fled. Zhang Yan snorted coldly and pointed with his hand. A sword light flew out and directly cut the golden ring into dust. The sword light didn't stop and continued to chase forward, slashing at Ni Qianying's back. But at this moment, a red light flashed and protected her. She only staggered, but didn't fall. She could be seen going behind the screen and turning into a ray of light. She went into the inner hall. Shouting in his ears, Zhang Yan looked around and saw more than a dozen female disciples raising many magic tools to attack him. He didn't bother to open his mouth to explain and casually flew out with a few swords, killing them on the spot. Then, he also turned into a ray of light and chased after the devil's treasury. Although Ni Qianying hid in a hurry, she didn't panic. Her actions were also quite methodical. When she arrived at the inner hall, she first activated the restriction and took out a golden bell. She shook it with force and shouted, "Disciples, a great enemy is in front of us. Quickly follow me and activate the Star Confusion Formation. Take down the murderer who killed Marshal Nephew Mu." The golden bell shook and the sound of jingling resounded through the entire palace. When the disciples heard this sound, they immediately knew that a strong enemy had come. They rushed from all directions and stood in various positions. This Star Confusion Formation was originally passed down from the Agarwood sect. Originally, there were only 36 people who set up the formation. After Lu Gu got Ni Qianying's help, he still hoped that she would do things for him. He was also worried that the Agarwood sect was small and weak. He was afraid that some devil cultivator with profound cultivation would casually kill them when he passed by. Therefore, he changed this formation so that every disciple of the Agarwood sect could fight in the formation. It was specially used to defend against strong enemies. When this formation was activated, the people who entered the formation could only see hundreds and thousands of stars flying, mixed together. It was impossible to distinguish which was strong and which was weak, which was real and which was fake. The real killing move was hidden in the middle. In addition, this formation could also concentrate power to attack together. Even a cultivator with profound cultivation would suffer a great loss if he was careless. At this time, Zhang Yan also entered the inner hall. The light of the conveyance light landed in front of the restriction. He looked up and found that the ground was covered with strange flowers. The fragrance of the flowers was faint and intoxicating. He could faintly see the silhouettes of beautiful women walking in strange steps, shuttling through the colorful flowers like butterflies fluttering in the wind. It was a dazzling sight. Ni Qianying stood on the high platform. When she saw him come in, she shouted and waved her sleeves. A gust of wind stirred up, stirring up the sea of flowers. Suddenly, countless broken petals flew up and floated towards him. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. With a single thought, a ball of golden flame profound light that was over 600 feet in diameter appeared above his head. No matter how the colorful and dazzling petals fell, they would immediately disappear without a trace upon coming into contact with the blazing flame, leaving not a single trace behind. Seeing this, Ni Qianying's face changed. She lightly opened her mouth and softly chanted a few incantations. More than 10 silver rings flew in the air, like bright moons, and smashed towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he saw this object. He recognized that it was originally the Agarwood Order's disciple, Hu Ju's magic weapon. He didn't expect it to fall into Ni Qianying's hands. With a thought, a dazzling sword light flew out from between his eyebrows. It turned into a graceful rainbow and clashed with the silver rings. A series of collisions rang out like rain. In just a moment, all the silver rings were cut in half, not a single one was missed. But at this time, Ni Qianying's face was full of joy. She didn't want to hurt the enemy just to buy time. Now that there was a gap, the disciples had all arrived and stood in their positions. She hurriedly shouted and the formation in the rear hall was immediately activated. Zhang Yan suddenly felt the scene in front of him change. Looking up, he saw stars hanging in the sky, a bright moon hanging high, and thousands of bright starlight sprinkling down like rain, all falling on him. Zhang Yan slightly frowned. Although this formation might not hurt him, once the formation was activated, if he broke it step by step, victory or defeat could not be determined in a short period of time. He didn't want to be entangled here. He thought to himself, looks like I'll have to learn from Lu Gu today and use brute force to break the formation. He shouted and released the Qi Mellow Shield in the air. Rays of light fell down, covering his body. Even if thousands of stars hit him, he didn't feel it. Then he made a hand sign and 365 in heavy water flew and danced above his head. He pointed to the front and the heavy water immediately converged into a long black river and rushed forward. Each drop of this heavy water had the power of 1,000 caddies. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to withstand one hit. Now that there were hundreds of drops gathered in one place, it was like annihilating 1,000 troops. There was nothing that could stop it. In this formation, flesh and blood flew and screams were heard. Ni Qianying saw that in a short moment, the disciples who set up the formation were reduced by half. She was shocked and hurriedly changed the formation. She stepped in a few positions and hid in a corner of the formation. It was just that Zhang Yan was using pure force to break through. He didn't care what direction the door was. After the heavy water swept around the surroundings a few times, not only was the formation in shambles, but even the palace seemed to have been ravaged by the flood. The palaces and pavilions collapsed, the buildings collapsed, and the trees were broken and flowers were destroyed. Although Ni Qianying saw that the situation was not right and dodged quickly, she was still brushed by the heavy water when she jumped to the side. Even the agarwood shield couldn't protect her. She couldn't help but spit out a few mouthfuls of blood. But she smiled viciously. Although she was seriously injured and sacrificed many disciples, she used the formation as a cover and successfully got within 200 feet of Zhang Yan. Here, she only needed to use the 7 absolute pillars that she borrowed from Shaoqing's sect and she would definitely be able to kill him on the spot. Seeing that the formation was gradually dispersing and Zhang Yan would be able to see her soon, she couldn't bear it anymore. She screamed and waved her hand. A huge pillar flew out and fell toward Zhang Yan's head. Once the huge pillar reached the air, it released rays of light. Thousands of sword chi shot out as if it could tear him apart in the blink of an eye. But at this moment, a green light suddenly flew out from between Zhang Yan's eyebrows. It attached to the huge pillar and fixed it in the air. Not only could it not fall for a while, but even the sword chi around it was also forced back. Zhang Yan raised his hand. 365 drops of heavy water collided with the huge pillar. It immediately fell to the ground and turned into a small pillar that was half a foot long. He grabbed the air and put it into his sleeve. The green light also fell down and flew back into his forehead. Ni Qianying was dumbstruck by this scene. Suddenly, the strength in her entire body disappeared as her legs went soft, and she fell to the ground. When she saw Zhang Yan walking towards her step by step, she was horrified in her heart, and she shouted loudly with a hoarse voice. Zhang Yan, I'm old friends with Shaoqing sect's disciples. If you dare kill me, they. Chapter 162. 10 days later, a flying boat landed on the ruins of the Agarwood Hall. A girl in a pink dress saw the mess on the peak. Broken bricks and tiles were everywhere. The garden that used to be green and peach trees was only left with withered branches and withered leaves. It seemed that it had been abandoned for a long time. She opened her mouth in shock and murmured, I only left for 2 months. How could the Agarwood Hall become like this? The woman beside her was dressed in white and her facial features were exquisite like a painting. She stood there like a white lotus emerging from the water, aloof from the world. However, her expression was calm as she said, Junior Marshal Sister Jiao, I see that the palaces on the other peaks are still there. Why don't you find your fellow disciples and ask them what happened? Junior Marshal Sister Jiao seemed to have run out of ideas. When she heard this, she quickly nodded. Just as she was about to activate the flying boat, she saw a woman flying over on a magical treasure. When the woman saw her, she exclaimed, Senior Marshal Sister Jiao, you're back. Junior Marshal Sister Jiao also recognized the person. When the woman landed, she quickly grabbed her arm and shook her, asking, Junior Marshal Sister Qi, tell me, what happened here? Junior Sister Qi looked around and her eyes reddened. She sobbed and said, that day, a fierce person came to the hall. Marshal Uncle and I said that this person was the culprit behind Senior Sister Hongqin's murder. We don't know why he came up the mountain, so Marshal Uncle and I led the other senior sisters and junior sisters to fight with this person. Unfortunately, this person was too fierce. We laid down the Great Star Array, but we still couldn't stop him. The white-clothed woman's eyes flickered, and she suddenly said, wait, you said there was only one person? Junior Marshal Sister Qi wiped her tears and nodded, yes, Senior Marshal Sister. You didn't see that Taoist. He only raised his hand and countless black beads rolled by. In the blink of an eye, the pillars collapsed and the buildings were destroyed. His ferocity was monstrous. The woman in white looked around at the ruins and couldn't help but tighten her grip on her sword. She frowned and murmured to herself, it doesn't look like it was caused by a magic treasure. Just one person alone was able to flatten this entire palace. Could it be a divine ability? She was lost in thought. Marshal Uncle and I. Junior Marshal Sister Jiao suddenly sobbed. It turned out that she and Ni Qianying were very close. When she heard that Ni Qianying had died in such a miserable way, she could not help but feel sad. She ran to the side and knelt in front of the cliff, crying loudly. The white-robed woman's beautiful eyes were cold, as if the emotions of others couldn't affect her in the slightest. She asked Junior Sister Qi, Junior Sister, do you know where this person came from? Junior sister Chi shook her head and said, we don't know either. We heard that one of our junior sisters saw him talking and laughing happily with senior sister Hongchen. They must be acquaintances, but the few senior and junior sisters who knew the inside story all died in this battle. The white-clothed woman asked, where are the corpses? Chi Shimi said, although there are many corpses of our fellow disciples buried under the roof tiles, these past few days we have found them and buried them. It's just a pity that Martial Uncle Ni's primordial spirit couldn't even escape. The woman in white asked again, do you know where this person is going? Did you see his face? Junior sister Chi thought for a while and said with uncertainty, he seems to be going to the east. As for his face. When it came to Zhang Yan's face, junior sister Chi was no longer as vague as before, and carefully described his face. She even described his clothes in great detail. The white-clothed woman nodded slightly, then turned around and walked towards junior sister Jiao. Seeing her coming, junior sister Jiao said in a sad voice, Martial Uncle and I was killed by that person, and even the 7 terminal pillars were taken away. This item was lost in the hands of our Agarwood sect. We should have found it for you, but you saw it yourself. Our sect is in such a terrible state now, I'm afraid we can't do anything about it. If another powerful enemy comes, we don't know how to defend ourselves. The white-clothed woman looked at her quietly and said, Junior sister, don't be sad. If you don't mind, I can give you a talisman, and you can take any junior sister who is willing to join our Yuan Yang sect as a disciple. What? Junior sister Jiao raised her head in surprise and said, can we join the Yuan Yang sect? The white-clothed woman shook her head and said, you can't join the Yuan Yang sect. What I'm talking about is the cave abode opened by the Yuan Yang sect's disciples outside the sect. Oh, junior sister Jiao was a little disappointed to hear that it wasn't the Yuan Yang sect's main sect. But then she thought, although she couldn't become a real disciple of the Yuan Yang sect, if she could join the Yuan Yang sect, she would be protected by the Yuan Yang sect, and wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. She could also call herself a Yuan Yang sect disciple, and no one would look down on her. She hurriedly wiped away her tears and bowed to the white-clothed woman, saying, thank you, senior sister Xian. I'm willing to go, and I thank you on behalf of all my junior sisters. The white-clothed woman said lightly, it's nothing, junior sister, you don't have to be so polite. She took out a talisman and handed it to junior sister Jiao, saying, with this, you can go to the 5 Smoke Mountain Path Source Immortal Mansion and look for senior sister Pei. Just say that I recommended you. Junior sister Jiao took the talisman, and then seemed to think of something. She asked in surprise, senior sister, where are you going? Aren't you going back to the sect? The white-clothed woman said, I wanted to borrow senior brother Chio's 7 absolute pillars for the sect's competition, and senior brother Chio allowed me to do so. Since it was taken by this person, I can't just sit by and do nothing, so I have to go and get it back from him. Junior sister Jiao was shocked, and after a moment of hesitation, she said, senior sister Xian, this person seems to be very powerful, you must be careful. The white-clothed woman nodded calmly, and without saying anything else, she turned into a white light and flew away, disappearing into the sky in the blink of an eye. At this moment, 5,000 kilometers away, Zhang Yan was sitting within a flying vessel immortal market, and he watched with interest as the golden toads leaped ceaselessly beneath him while the guests cheered loudly and tossed down a handful of golden beans from time to time. At this time, the bead curtain was lifted, and Jun Ling walked in from outside. When she saw Zhang Yan, she smiled before saying anything, and said, I thought it was an immortal guest who specifically called me over, so it's really an old acquaintance. Immortal Zhang, I wonder what item in the immortal market caught your eye this time, so that I can make early preparations and satisfy the immortal guest. Zhang Yan smiled, and said directly, since we're old acquaintances, I won't beat around the bush. This time I want to go out to sea, and I need to buy a ship to cross the sea. Do you have any connections here? His journey to the East Sea was long, and it was common to not see a single island in the vast sea for several months. Moreover, There were frequent attacks from monsters and strange beasts in the sea, so it was obviously not advisable to rely on his own strength to fly. Therefore, buying a sea-flying boat as a means of transportation was urgent. Junling was stunned when she heard this. Then, she smiled sweetly, and said, "Immortal guest, there has never been a precedent of selling sea-flying boats here," but, she glared at Zhang Yan, covered her mouth, and laughed, and said, "Immortal guest, you've asked the right person. On the East Sea, there's a big family surnamed Yin, and they're one of the top families that build sea-flying boats. Their leader is a good friend of my boat owner, so I can ask my boat owner to write a letter over. I'm sure you won't make a trip for nothing." Zhang Yan nodded. This flying boat immortal market was built on the sea-flying boats, and it would be a joke if he said he didn't know where to look for a sea-flying boat. However, his original intention was not to get an ordinary one, but a high-class sea-flying boat that was extremely difficult to find. Otherwise, he could go to the East Sea's immortal market and randomly choose one. Junling obviously had a clever heart, and she understood his intention at a glance. Therefore, she gave him an answer that satisfied him. A big family like the Yin family that specialized in crafting had an extraordinary status. If it wasn't for the fact that there was a personal relationship that led them to their door, they definitely wouldn't bother with you. Since that was the case, Zhang Yan also returned the favor, and pushed a brocade box over. Junling didn't open it, and very generously put the item away. She said with a smile, "Immortal guest, please wait for a moment. I'll go ask the boat owner to write a letter." She bowed, turned around, and walked out. Zhang Yan cast his gaze down again, but the woman didn't make him wait for too long. In the time it took to eat a meal, she turned back, raised the letter in her lily-white hands, and gently presented it. Zhang Yan took a look, and discovered that there were two letters. One was addressed to the Yin family leader, and the other clearly stated the location of the Yin family's residence. There was also a simple topographic map attached. Both letters were written by the same person, and the handwriting was graceful and contained a faint fragrance. It was obvious that they were written by a young woman. Although it could be seen that this woman was extremely meticulous in her work, Zhang Yan's brows still furrowed slightly. Seeing this, Junling smiled lightly, and said, "Immortal guest, please don't misunderstand. Although this letter was written by my wife, the boat owner's letters have always been written by her, and she definitely won't delay your important matters." Zhang Yan nodded slightly, put the letter into his sleeve, and nodded to Junling. Then, he leaped up, and a long rainbow shot out of the celestial market, flying straight to the coast of the East Sea. The Yin family's residence was called Three Suns Island, and it was an island in the inner lake. It was a place with verdant hills, clear waters, and beautiful scenery. Zhang Yan arrived here just now half a month later, and went straight to visit the Yin family leader with the letter. Zhang Yan didn't mention that he was a disciple of the Qinsang school, so the elder didn't take it to heart too much. He just thought that it was another favor from the celestial market's boat owner, and after a few polite words, he returned to the inner room, and only ordered his eldest son to come out and continue greeting Zhang Yan, thinking that he had given him enough face. This person's name was Yin Zishou, and he was in his 30s, at the second level of the clear Qi realm. Seeing that Zhang Yan was already a mystic light realm cultivator, and his cultivation was far above his own, he was very polite to him. "Since Daoist wants a sea boat and is in urgent need of it, I have a few drawings here. You can take a look, and if there's anything you like, I'll immediately make it." Zhang Yan took it and looked at it. He saw that the drawings were all drawn and formed. Once he held it in his hand, he only needed to infuse it with spirit qi, and the image of a sea boat would appear. After looking at a few of them, he asked curiously, "Why are all these sea boats so inconspicuous?" Yin Zishou chuckled, and said, "Daoist, you don't know this, but the outer sea is filled with strange beasts, and there are as many demonic cultivators as there are stars in the sky. This flying boat is meant to be sturdy and durable, and it's fine as long as it doesn't attract people's attention. Only the sea merchants under the demonic king's rule will use large boats, and when they go out, they usually sail thousands of sails on the sea, forming large groups of boats, so they aren't afraid of those demonic beasts. Zhang Yan nodded, and said, I see, but how long does it take to make a sea boat? Yin Zishou slowly said, not long, at most half a year, at least 3 months. Cultivators had a long lifespan, and they could afford to wait, but Zhang Yan didn't have the patience to wait for so long. From Elder Yan's tone, the journey was also very long, and now that a year had passed, he didn't want to waste a few more months. If he missed the 4 seasons water because of this reason, it would be too late for regrets, so he said, may I ask if there are any ready-made sea boats in the manor? Yin Zishou thought for a moment, then nodded, and said, there is one, but... Taoist, do you really want it? Chapter 163. Dragon Country's great ocean ship. Zhang Yan heard that Yin Zhichou's words seemed a little strange, so he asked, is there something wrong with this ship? Yin Zhichou shook his head and said with a wry smile, I'll order someone to bring the drawing over. You'll know when you see it. He whispered a few words to a manservant beside him, and the manservant left to carry out the order. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he returned with a drawing and a black box. Yin Zhichou took them and carefully placed the black box on the table. He then slowly unfolded the drawing in front of Zhang Yan. He infused a wisp of spiritual energy into it and said, fellow Taoist, please take a look. The size of this ship, the material it's made of, the number of restrictions, and the height of the upper and lower floors are all clearly indicated in this drawing. Stimulated by his spiritual energy, the tracing picture scroll immediately revealed a shadow of light. In the light, there was a ship that was 9 stories tall, looking very mighty and extraordinary. There was even a line of words floating on the left side, which said, Dragon Country's Great Ocean Ship. After taking a few glances, Zhang Yan looked at the description at the bottom of the drawing, and the more he read, the more surprised he became. This ship was actually 1,200 meters long, and 900 meters wide. It should be known that the smallest ship was 20 to 30 meters, and the largest was no more than 100 meters. Compared to them, this Dragon Country ship was really too huge. He sighed and said, the Yin family can actually build such a ship. It's really uncanny workmanship. However, it's so big, I'm afraid it won't be easy to control. Seeing that he had the intention to refuse, Yin Zhichou hurriedly pointed at the 1-meter-long black box and said anxiously, fellow Taoist, please look at this. Zhang Yan looked at it, and his heart suddenly moved. He said in surprise, oh, could this be the hull of the ship? Yin Zhichou looked at him in surprise and praised, fellow Taoist, you have a good eye. Not bad. This is the hull of this Dragon Country ship. Hearing this, Zhang Yan's interest was piqued. If a ship had the shape of a ship's hull, it meant that it had been forged as a mystic instrument. Just like the flying ship he was riding, it could change its size at will. Moreover, mystic instruments could be forged into mystic instruments by chance. However, it was unheard of to build such a large ship. In order to make a magic tool change its size at will, every piece of material needed to be inscribed with hundreds and thousands of restriction spells, and it had to be refined in the same cauldron. The cauldron couldn't contain a magic tool that was over 100 meters long, so they could only choose to refine it in. According to the size of the ship, the Yin clan had at least used a heaven and earth furnace that was over 3 kilometers in size to forge it. As far as he knew, there was only one such cauldron in Qinsang school. Yin Zhichou observed Zhang Yan's expression, and seeing that he seemed to be interested, he hurriedly said, fellow Taoist, this ship has a total of 3 layers of restriction. Every time you open up a layer, its size will increase. If fellow Taoist buys this item, you don't have to open it to the extreme. You only need to refine the first layer, and then it will only be 4,000 meters long. Zhang Yan couldn't help but laugh. Only 4,000 meters? How could he say that? This size was comparable to the lofty cloud tower that Yuanyingzhenren rode. However, a land ship didn't need to withstand huge waves and gales, and it couldn't cross the sea or swim in rivers. It was inferior in terms of materials, so even if it was the same size, it couldn't compare to a sea ship. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I see that this ship can be considered to be a treasure. Why is fellow Taoist willing to sell it? Yin Zhiqiu admitted it frankly and sighed. I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. This thing was originally used as the main ship in the celestial market. For the sake of forging this thing, my grandfather spent a great deal of good materials, and he even owed a great deal of favors. However, the owner of the celestial ship passed away in an accident, so it was left in my Yin clan. It's already been over 50 years now. This matter wasn't a secret, and those who were interested could find out if they inquired about it a little, so he disdained to conceal it. After the previous owner of this ship passed away, the Yin clan was willing to sell it at a loss. However, the cost of forging it was too high, and it wouldn't be much lower even if they sold it cheaply. On the other hand, those who had the ability to purchase it were afraid because one of the ship's previous owners had died, and they would rather forge a new one than buy it. However, Zhang Yan didn't mind. Since the hull was here, it was sufficient to show that it hadn't been refined by someone before, so he asked, May I know how much it's worth? Yin Zhiqiu couldn't help but be overjoyed when he heard this, and he hurriedly said, If fellow Taoist Zhang takes a fancy to it, then you can take the 10,000 spirit shell, and I can make the decision to gift you another 2 small ships. Although they can't compare to a large ship, and they can't travel far, they're sufficient to resist ordinary winds and waves. The 20,000 spirit shells was the original cost of forging this ship, and it even included a great deal of the Yin clan's precious materials. However, this ship was indeed useless here, so it was better to find a buyer as soon as possible. Yin Zhiqiu was afraid that the price would be too high and scare Zhang Yan away, so he made up his mind and lowered the price by half. However, he was thinking too much. Zhang Yan calculated in his heart and decided to buy it. Alright, I'll take it. However, this ship is truly too huge, and it's slightly troublesome to refine it. I wonder if fellow Taoist has any methods. An ordinary ship could be refined in just a few days, but no matter how huge this ship was, it would still take more than a month to refine the first layer of the restriction. If he could, of course, he would try his best not to delay. When Yin Zhiqiu saw that Zhang Yan agreed to buy this item, he was also overjoyed. After listening to Zhang Yan's sigh, he concentrated and thought for a moment. His heart moved, and he said, Fellow Taoist Zhang, actually, I have an idea. I'll tell you for the time being. Whether you're willing or not, it's all up to fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, please say it. Yin Zhiqiu revealed a trace of a kind smile and said, The ship is useless in the coastal waters. If you want to go out to the open sea, it will take at least half a month. In the coastal waters, there are many forces, big and small, and there are also demons and demon bandits that rob and kill passing cultivators. If you fly rashly without a token or flag, it will definitely attract a lot of trouble. My Yin clan also has a few ships that move around the coastal waters. I can arrange one to carry fellow Taoist on the journey. Firstly, it won't delay fellow Taoist's journey, and secondly, it will also give you time to refine the ship. When the ship reaches the open sea, it will naturally be open to the outside world. Isn't it the best of both worlds? When Zhang Yan heard this, his eyes also brightened. He felt that this suggestion was not bad. He said happily, Alright, then I'll trouble fellow Taoist Yin. However, I can't wait for long. Yin Zhiqiu said in a low voice, Today, I'll arrange it. Within 3 days, fellow Taoist will definitely be able to leave. After getting a definite answer from Yin Zhiqiu, Zhang Yan was also very straightforward. He immediately took out a sufficient amount of spirit shells from his sleeve. Because the quality of the spirit shells in his hand was high, 5,000 was enough. Seeing that everything had been discussed, he stood up and left. Yin Zhiqiu saw that when Zhang Yan took out 10,000 top-grade spirit shells, he didn't even frown. Even though he was from a big clan, he was still secretly amazed. After sending off Zhang Yan, he pondered for a while in the room and said, Someone, go and call Erlang here. The servant received the order and left. 2 hours later, a young man with flippant eyebrows came in. This person was In Jicho's second brother, In Jijun. However, seeing his eldest brother, he seemed to be a little afraid. He carefully came up to greet and said, "Eldest brother, you're looking for me." In Jicho nodded with a straight face and said in a low voice, "Second brother, I'm here to ask you, is the wave-splitting frightening shark ship still there?" In Jijun's heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly said, "Yes, it's still there." "How can it not be there?" In Jicho didn't notice his flustered expression and only nodded slightly. He said, "Oh, that's good. Go and make the arrangements. Tomorrow, hang up our In clan's flag and send a fellow cultivator to Sealed Prayer Island." After saying this, he saw that In Jijun was standing there for a long time, as if he had lost his soul. He couldn't help but frown and yell, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and do it." In Jijun was startled and only then came back to his senses. He hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, yes." When he walked out of the hall, his face was full of worry. After returning home, he was even more restless. Finally, he said to the servant beside him, "Go, invite Steward Chiu here. Tell him I have an urgent matter to discuss with him." Not long after, the servant found a white-haired old man with a goatee and a shrewd appearance. Seeing In Jijun, he came up and bowed. He said, "Greetings, Erlang." In Jijun stepped forward and grabbed the old man's hand. He said anxiously, "Uncle Chiu, do you know who came to visit eldest brother today?" Steward Chiu looked surprised. He thought for a while and said, replying to Erlang, "It seems like it's a favor from the owner of the Celestial Market's boat. Master also came out to show his face." "Oh, it's a favor from there. This person must have some background. I can't offend him." "Oh no, oh no." In Jijun let out a long sigh. His head was full of sweat and he kept pacing in the room. Steward Chiu was very calm. He coughed and said, "I've also heard of eldest brother's arrangements. I wonder if Erlang has any difficulties. Can you tell this old man about it?" In Jijun looked at him with an awkward expression. He said in a low voice, "I won't hide it from Uncle Chiu. A few days ago at the Pujian Flower Festival, Lady Shan said she wanted to go to the Gui Gui Palace to visit a friend. I boasted that I had a sea boat, but she said she wanted to borrow it. Our In clan's reputation is important, so how could we refuse? Tomorrow, she will come here and borrow the sea boat to go out to sea. But at this time, eldest brother suppressed this matter. What should I do?" Steward Chiu didn't find it strange. This second young master of the In clan was fond of beauties. It was normal for him to have such an expression when facing the famous beauty of Lady Shan from Pingyuan sect. He pondered for a while and probed, "Can you take Lady Shan back?" As soon as he said this, the panic-stricken In Jijun jumped up and shouted, "Nonsense! Lady Shan is a fairy who has turned into a human. This time, I finally have a chance to show my face in front of her. How can I slap my own face? Let those fellows laugh at me." Steward Chiu chuckled and said, "Erlang, don't be anxious. This matter is not impossible." In Jijun felt as if he had found a life-saving straw. He stepped forward and grabbed Steward Chiu's arm. He asked anxiously, "Uncle Chiu, what do you want me to do?" Steward Chiu said calmly, "Just let them board the same boat." In Jisho waved his hand and said, "How can this be done? With Lady Shan's temper, won't she throw this person off the boat to feed the fishes?" Steward Chiu stroked his goatee and smiled. He said, "I have also boarded this sea boat before. It is quite spacious. A long sea journey cannot be separated from the In clan. When the time comes, we can arrange for a discerning steward to go. As long as the arrangements are made in advance, these two people may not have the chance to meet." In Jisho was startled at first. Then, his eyes lit up. He rubbed his hands and said, "This method is very good, very good." Then, as if remembering something, he cupped his hands at Steward Chiu and said, Uncle Chio's kindness in giving me advice, I will never dare to forget it. Chapter 164. 2 days later, at the Scarlet Wind Cliff of the Eastern Sea. A boat about 300 feet long was anchored on the sea. The sail was painted with a flying three-legged divine bird. This was the flag of the Yin clan of the Three Suns Island. Zhang Yan stood at the bow of the boat. The sky was clear as if it had been washed. Ahead of him, the blue waves rolled and fish leaped, and from time to time, 2 or 3 birds flew by. At this time, there was a burst of hurried footsteps behind him. A middle-aged steward with an honest appearance hurried up and said respectfully, "Honored guest, what instructions do you have for me?" Without turning his head, Zhang Yan asked, "Why are you stopping here?" The steward hesitated for a moment, seeming to be in a difficult position. He cupped his hands and explained, reporting to the honored guest, "The descendants of a few old friends of the old madam need to go to the outer seas. They also want to board this boat. Please wait for half a day." After saying this, although he was nervous, he was not afraid. He had been instructed by Steward Chiu in advance. As long as he said this, even if the other party saw through something fishy, they would not immediately turn hostile because of the old madam's reputation. However, this would undoubtedly offend people. It was just that Steward Chiu did not know of Zhang Yan's background, so he did not think too much. If he knew that Zhang Yan was a true disciple of the Qinsang school, he would not have interfered so casually. Zhang Yan stood there without moving, but the steward did not know why, but he had an indescribable feeling of fear. Finally, he heard a faint voice in his ear. "Only wait for 4 hours." Hearing this, the steward heaved a long sigh of relief. He hurriedly cupped his hands and retreated as if he had been granted amnesty. At this moment, he looked like he was about to collapse. His face was pale, and he trembled as he took out a white handkerchief to wipe the beads of sweat on his forehead. He laughed bitterly and stood at the stern of the boat. There, he stretched his neck and waited, hoping that Lady Shan would come sooner. In the end, his luck was pretty good. 2 hours later, a bright red cloud appeared in the distant horizon. More than 50 young men and women stood on it like an immortal couple. This group of people was very ostentatious. The flying incense carriage in the front opened the way, and on the left and right sides of the carriage were maids carrying mirror boxes and flower baskets. In the middle of the carriage was a cloud couch. The umbrella was covered with white gauze, and the corner of the golden bell was hung. The graceful figure of a woman could be vaguely seen. The steward couldn't help but sigh. "I heard that Lady Shan is the disciple of Pingyuan sect's sect leader. She is indeed extraordinary." When the cloud reached the stern of the ship, he hurriedly retreated a few more steps, bowed and said, "Lady Shan, I am Jing Shu. I have been waiting for a long time under the orders of Erlang." A pretty maidservant moved closer to the veil and whispered a few words. The woman seemed to say something, and the maidservant nodded. She stood up and said in a clear voice, "My wife has ordered, wait." At this moment, a young cultivator standing on a shuttle-shaped instrument stood up. He first cupped his hands towards the woman in the veil, then he said to Steward Jing, "Lady Shan is as clean as ice and as clean as jade. You can't be tainted by filth. Let me ask you, did you sweep this boat clean? Did any outsiders sneak in?" This person's name was Yang Bingqing. He was the right-hand man of a demon king of the Eastern Sea. He had never been on good terms with Yin Jijun. He knew that Yin Erlang's position in the clan was not high. When he said that he would take out a sea boat, he originally thought that Yin Erlang was just bragging. Now that he had seen it with his own eyes, and that he had managed to gain Lady Shan's favor, he inevitably felt uncomfortable. Therefore, he immediately jumped out to nitpick. However, what he said was reasonable, so the accompanying maidservant only rolled her eyes at him and did not stop him. Steward Jing was shocked and hurriedly said, "Honorable guest, there is no one else on this boat except for a few boatmen who do odd jobs." Yang Bingqing said with a faint smile, "Whether there is or not, it's not up to you to decide. We need to send someone to search." Steward Jing was about to say something else when a gentle voice came from behind the veil. Yin Erlang has helped me a lot this time. I have to give him and the Yin clan some face. Let's forget about it. Yang Bingqing wanted to say a few more words, but the cloud couch had already been lifted and was walking towards the pavilion on the boat. He couldn't help but snort. Steward Jing secretly wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and felt lucky. Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother Yang, for escorting me all the way. However, once on the sea boat, my wife will be taken care of by my servants. Senior Marshal Brother Yang, please go back. After taking 2 steps, the delicate and pretty maidservant suddenly blocked Yang Bingqing's way. She looked like she wanted to send him off. Yang Bingqing's smile remained unchanged. He cupped his hands and said, "Then, I wish Lady Shan a safe journey." The maidservant bowed to him and no longer paid attention to him. She turned around and entered the pavilion on the boat. Yang Bingqing watched as the sea boat slowly sailed away and gradually became a black dot in his sight. His face couldn't help but sink. He changed into a sinister tone and said, "Humph, Dan Huizhen, you are now high and mighty. After a few days, when Demon King Qiao takes your yin, he will bestow you to me. At that time, I want to see how you will wag your tail and beg in front of me." He laughed wildly and chanted a spell. He pointed to the sky, and a short sword turned into a white light and flew towards the sky. He glared at her for a few more times before stepping on his magic tool and leaving. After all kinds of ornaments, utensils, and furnishings were arranged, Lady Shan lifted the veil and sat down on the couch in the pavilion. She was extremely beautiful with rosy cheeks and black eyebrows. Her skin was like porcelain and jade, and her eyes were like red cinnabar. Although she was somewhat charming, her eyes were very clear. At this moment, she said softly, "Xiao Steward Jing seemed to have something to say just now. Go and invite him in." "Yes, lady." The maidservant turned around and went out. After a while, she brought Steward Jing in. After standing in the room, Steward Jing took out a letter and presented it with both hands. He said, "This is what Erlang asked me to give to Lady Shan." The maidservant took it and handed it over to Lady Shan. Lady Shan flipped through it and said in a warm voice, "Yin Erlang is too polite. I'm just borrowing the Yin clan's boat. How could I dare to call myself the owner and drive away the Yin clan's guest? Steward, please rest assured that I am not a rude and unreasonable person." When Steward Jing heard this, he finally felt relieved. To be honest, when Steward Qiu instructed him to handle this matter, he already knew that if there was a conflict between the two parties, he would be the scapegoat. Now that everything was fine, all he needed to do was to endure this 1 month. He bowed to Lady Shan and slowly retreated out of the room. The maidservant took a look at him and then looked at Lady Shan. She then chased after him and chattered outside the door. No one knew what she said to Steward Jing. After a while, she came back angrily. She said indignantly, "Lady, Yin Erlang is too unscrupulous. We clearly agreed that this sea boat is to be lent to us. How could there be someone else on the same boat?" Lady Shan smiled and said, "That letter said that this person is Master Yin's guest. Yin Jijun couldn't refuse and even begged me not to make things difficult for that guest. I don't think this letter was written by him. If it was Yin Erlang, how could he be willing to give up his pride to come and talk to me?" The maid agreed, "Nyangzi is right. Yin family's second Lang cares about face the most. He would rather die than let Nyangzi look down on him. In Xiu Er's opinion, the person on this boat might be the nephew of some Yin family steward." Lady Shan sighed softly and said, "This time, I went out to sea with great fanfare. I used myself as bait to lure out Demon King 9 chiefs. This Demon King's magic power is strong. I don't know which of his 5 doppelgangers will come. Even with the help of my magic weapon, I may not be able to kill him. This matter shouldn't involve others. Xiu go and greet the guest of the Yin family. If there is no problem, ask him to leave." Xiu rolled her eyes and revealed a crafty look. She said, "Don't worry, wife. Xiao will definitely do it well. Lady Shan frowned and said in a serious manner, Xiao, don't mess around. If this guest of the Yin family is a decent Taoist cultivator, you can persuade him with kind words. Xiao replied, don't worry, wife. Xiao has just inquired clearly from Steward Jing. This person is traveling alone and didn't even bring a follower with him. He's very shabby. At worst, I will give him some spiritual shells. If he's smart, he will accept it and leave obediently. It's just a matter of changing to another boat. If he's not willing, then I have done my best. His life or death is up to fate. Lady Shan smiled softly and teased, my Xiao has become much more sensible. Xiao blushed and said, I've been with you for a long time. I've learned a little. Lady Shan waved her hand lightly and said with a smile, go. Xiao bowed and retreated. She went out of the attic and inquired with Steward Jing. Then, she walked towards Zhang Yan's residence. When she reached the door, she shouted, is the teacher in? Zhang Yan's clear voice came from inside. He said, who's outside? Xiao said, my wife is on the same boat as the teacher, so she sent me to greet you. Zhang Yan said, your wife is very considerate. Please greet him on my behalf. Xiao pouted and said, can the teacher open the door? My wife has something for me to bring to the teacher. The door opened without any wind. Xiao looked up and saw a young Taoist sitting on a couch separated by a bamboo curtain. She couldn't see his face clearly. She didn't enter the room. She took out a jade box from her pouch and put it down. She said, my wife said that on this journey to the open sea, the wind is strong and the waves are strong. The undercurrent is turbulent. Mister, please accept this. Maybe you'll be safe. Then, she bowed and turned to leave. Not long after, Xiao returned to the cabin. Lady Shan asked softly, how is this person? Xiao was only a maiden. Her cultivation was low and she hadn't opened her meridians. She could only judge the other person's cultivation based on her own experience. Usually, she could see it very accurately. However, Zhang Yan's cultivation was much higher than hers. Not to mention the bamboo curtain, she couldn't see through his cultivation even if she was in front of him. However, she was usually influenced by what she saw and heard. Which young cultivator with high cultivation didn't have an entourage around them? They came and went with great pomp. Zhang Yan was alone and borrowed the Yin family's boat to go out to sea. She assumed that this person's cultivation wasn't very high. Thus, she said, my wife, he's just an ordinary cultivator. His cultivation may not be higher than mine. I've already put down the 1,000 spiritual shells and gave him a few pointers. If he's smart, he should know what to do. If he's stubborn and refuses to leave, don't blame us if something happens. Since he was just an ordinary cultivator, Lady Shan didn't take it to heart. She nodded and said, Xiao, you did well. If we can successfully kill that demon king 9 spirits, my teacher will pass on a great technique to me. I'll become one of the 4 great disciples in the sect. At that time, I'll be qualified to let you enter the sect. Xiao was overjoyed when she heard this. Her eyes reddened for some reason. She knelt down and said, you're the best to Xiao. Xiao will repay you with my life. Chapter 165. Stargazing heavenly palace. In the coastal waters, there were dozens of forces of different sizes. Every time they arrived at a place, they had to get a pass and hang up a flag. Otherwise, all kinds of trouble would come knocking on their door. Fortunately, Lady Yin's reputation was big enough. After sailing for more than 10 days, there were more than 20 flags hanging on both sides of the ship, so no one deliberately made things difficult for them. Wife, Steward Jing said that the poison demon reef is in front. Xiao lifted the hem of her dress and ran into the inner room. Lady Shan's phoenix eyes flashed slightly. She lowered her head and saw a phoenix perching thither. She gently stroked it with her hand and suddenly raised her head, saying, "Xiao, go and light the incense." The poison demon reef was overgrown with submerged reefs, and there were no major forces in the surrounding area. If 9 Chief Demon King wanted to make a move, this was the most likely place. Hearing this, Xiao's expression became excited. Even her cheeks were flushed, and her voice became even clearer as she said heavily, "Yes." Not long after, an offering table was placed on the top floor of the attic, and 3 big incense sticks were lit. Lady Shan knelt down gracefully and kowtowed 3 times in front of the incense stick table. She silently said in her heart, "Disciple Shan Huizhen kowtows here, asking Patriarch to open the door of the heavenly palace and help disciple slay the demons." Yuanping sect was different from other sections. When the founder of the sect was traveling in the void, he once obtained a profound weapon that had its true spirit destroyed. This treasure was called Stargazing Heavenly Palace, and it was divided into 10 halls. Each hall hid a gang qi, and each hall was more powerful than the previous one. At that time, the founder had an idea and separated a part of his spirit into it, and it became one with the true spirit. After refining this treasure, he threw it back into the void and passed down a spell. As long as it was a disciple of Yuanping sect, as long as they burned incense, prayed, and silently recited the spell, they would be able to communicate with it and borrow the power of the heavenly palace to kill the enemy. However, Lady Shan's cultivation hadn't reached that level yet, so if she wanted to borrow the power of the heavenly palace to hurt the enemy, she still needed the help of the phoenix perching zither. Xiao looked around and said, "Wife, why haven't I seen senior brother Chen and senior brother Wang?" This time, Lady Shan had made a lot of preparations in order to plot against the 9 Demons King. She was afraid that she couldn't handle it alone, so she invited a few good friends to come and help. Chen and Wang were the most enthusiastic among them. Hearing this, she said thoughtfully, "If they don't come now, then the Demon King must have sensed something and is trying to stop them." Xiao, of Demon King of Xiao, Lady Shan shook her head. Although she took the initiative to use herself as bait, the 9 leaders Demon King had been famous for a long time. How could he be fooled so easily? However, this was only an overt plot. If she hid in the mountain gate of Pingyuan sect, 9 leaders Demon King would not be able to do anything to her. Only when she was alone outside would she have the opportunity to attack. Even though he knew this was a trap, this Demon King would still rush over to fight her. This time, she was fully prepared. Even if those people couldn't make it, it wouldn't be a problem. At this moment, Lady Shan seemed to have sensed something. Her beautiful eyes narrowed, and her voice suddenly lowered. She said, "Xiao, you go down first. Remember, no matter what happens, don't come out." Xiao nodded seriously, "Wife, don't worry. I won't cause trouble." Lady Shan took a deep breath, got up, and walked out of the pavilion. She leaped to the top of the ship and stood still. She stared ahead and said loudly, "Since Demon King Qiao is here, why don't you come out?" As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a loud laugh that shook the surroundings. In an instant, a gust of wind blew, and the sea a few miles away surged. A tall man with a golden crown on his head stepped on the sea. He was over 10 feet tall, wearing a purple dragon robe and a pair of shoes with a dragon's head. He held a long rope in his hand, and behind him was a bloody corpse of an old man. When he saw Lady Shan, he looked at her with burning eyes and said loudly, but in front of Lady Shan, "I am Qiao Ao. Today, I'm here to take your primordial yin." His voice was so loud that it caused the waves to surge. What he was about to do was obviously shameful, but he said it as if it was only right and proper. Lady Shan's eyes fell on the corpse, and her beautiful face changed slightly. She whispered, "Elder Teng." Demon King Jiu Kue laughed loudly and said, "Lady Shan, I know you've invited many people to help. You don't have to wait any longer. I might as well tell you that someone is taking care of them for me." Lady Shan shook her head and said, "Demon King Qiao has really put in a lot of effort to deal with my daughter." Although her voice wasn't loud, it was clear to the ears. It was soft, sweet, and extremely charming. Demon King Jiu Kuei's eyes suddenly burned with passion. He stared at her and said, "Lady Shan, why don't you obediently submit to me and let me take your primordial yin? I can make you my concubine. Although I already have hundreds of concubines, I can still treat you even better." He was used to being arrogant and domineering. At this moment, he expressed himself naked, but he didn't hide it at all. He was originally born as an ancient mutant, so he naturally knew how to cultivate. His method of cultivation was much more superior than others, so he thought highly of himself. Every time he made great progress in his cultivation, another head would grow out from his body. Each head could transform into a doppelganger. Now that he had 4 heads, he could create 4 doppelgangers. However, to confuse people, even his real body was known as the 5 doppelgangers. However, in order to grow the 5th head, he still needed to steal the primordial yin of at least 3 women with minor yin meridians, and this Lady Shan was one of his targets. Lady Shan stood at the top of the boat and let the wind blow up her clothes. She hugged her zither and said quietly, "Demon King Qiao, although you're a 3rd-level core transformation cultivator, you're only a doppelganger today. At most, you're only at the mystic light realm. If you don't have help today, you might not be able to beat me." Demon King Jiu Kuei smiled proudly and said, "Lady Shan, you don't have to provoke me with words. Although you're talented, you're only a 1st-level mystic light realm cultivator. If you came from the 10 major sects of the Xian Gate and had the inheritance of a mystic technique, I might not dare to say I can win for sure. But what does the Pingyuan sect have? Do you think I care about it?" A cold light flashed in Lady Shan's beautiful eyes, and she said, "I've long heard that Demon King Qiao is a hero among the demons, but what you see is false. How about this? Today, I'll use the mystic technique of my sect to fight with you. If you win, not only will I let you do whatever you want, but I'm also willing to be your concubine. If you lose," Demon King Jiu Kuei looked up to the sky and laughed loudly. He interrupted her and said, "If you win, you can take my head." Lady Shan's expression suddenly turned solemn, and her whole person became full of heroic spirit. Compared to her weak appearance just now, she seemed to be a completely different person. She said seriously, "If that's the case, Demon King Qiao, please take this." Demon King Jiu Kuei waved his hand and said indifferently, "Show me what you have. I'll make you lose convincingly today." Lady Shan's eyes drooped, and she immediately sat down cross-legged. She placed the phoenix-shaped zither on her knees and plucked the strings with her slender fingers. A beautiful melody that sounded like rolling jade beads sounded, instantly helping her divine sense to connect to the 1st hall of the startling sky palace. The blade aura hidden in the 1st hall of heaven could turn into countless tangible swords and sabers to kill the opponent. At this moment, under the guidance of the divine sense zither, countless white blades appeared out of nowhere, slicing through the air and slashing toward Demon King Jiu Kuei's head. Demon King Jiu Kuei glanced at it and had an expression of disdain. He cultivated with strength, and even though this clone was only at the mystic light realm, it had a body of steel and bones. He didn't try to block and raised his head, allowing the white blades to land on his body. At this moment, only the sound of clanging could be heard, but he acted like nothing happened. He just acted like it was a gentle breeze. Lady Shan seemed to have expected this. Unhurriedly, she played the phoenix-perching zither with her 10 fingers, and the sound went straight up. In a short while, she reached the 2nd heavenly palace. The poison cloud evil spirit was hidden in this palace, which could penetrate through the acupoints and enter the abdomen, rotting the internal organs. As she played the zither, clouds of 5-colored smoke came out of nowhere and floated down. They were like colorful clouds in the sky, dazzling and eye-catching. Demon King Jiu Kuei laughed weirdly. "How can such a small trick hurt me?" He pinched his nose aperture, puffed his cheeks and blew. A stream of yellow turbid air spurted out 3 feet away. As soon as it saw the wind, it turned into 1,000 feet long smoke. It circled up and gathered all the clouds together. Then, it turned into a hurricane and flew straight up into the sky. No one knew where it was taken. The expression on Lady Shan's beautiful face did not change. Her fingers plucked the strings of the zither repeatedly. The sound of the zither became more intense and sonorous. She opened the gate of heaven above the third heavenly palace and activated the mountain evil spirit, hidden in this layer, turning it into thousands of huge rocks that rained down. Demon King Jiao Kuei sneered and shouted. He didn't take out his weapon, but punched left and right. Amidst the rumbling sounds, he smashed the hard rocks that were the size of millstones into pieces. He was having a good time, and he couldn't help but laugh. Lady Shan, if your master Shin Tu Fu was here today, I would be afraid. But you're just a cultivator at the first level of the mystic light realm. Opening the third hall of heaven is already your limit, so how can you hurt me? Beauty, why don't you admit defeat and follow me back to live happily? Lady Shan didn't care about his nonsense. Her eyes were fierce, and while the Demon King was being held back by the endless mountain aura, she secretly activated a treasure. This treasure was called the Moon-Devouring Soul Formation, and it was one of the 3 formation diagrams of Yuanping sect. It could gather the magic power of the 50 disciples that she brought with her and use it to increase her own cultivation. This was her true trump card. She was originally only at the first level of the mystic light realm, but with the help of the formation diagram, her power rose and reached the third level of the mystic light realm in the blink of an eye. Her chi, mind, and spirit were all complete, and she didn't need the help of the zither. With just a thought, she connected to the 4th hall of heaven, and the shadow-fixing fiend in this level instantly turned into a dazzling green light that rained down. Demon King Jiao Kuei was having a good time fighting, and he didn't expect such a move at all. He was instantly immobilized by the green light. Although the fiend could freeze people, it could only freeze the Demon King for a few breaths of time. However, it was enough for Lady Shan. She took out a grayish-green old vine and was about to throw it into the air, but she suddenly felt her body go numb, and she lost all her strength. Then, she was hugged by a big hand, and someone laughed loudly in her ear. "Old Third, you look so pathetic." Without anyone controlling the shadow-fixing fiend, Demon King Jiao Kuei broke free after a while, and he angrily said to this person, "Old Second, what are you saying? This girl has the phoenix-binding vine that I borrowed from Taihao School to protect her. If I wasn't the bait, how would you have the chance to get her?" If Lady Shan could raise her head, she would see that the 2 people who were talking looked exactly the same, as if they were made from the same mold. Demon King Jiao Kuei sneered, "The 2 of us should separate as soon as possible. If that old demon Zheng finds out, he will definitely capture us." That person said, "How can I not know? After we absorb this girl, we will reach the Yuanying realm. When old Sixth comes out, we won't be afraid of old demon Zheng anymore." Demon King Jiao Kuei chuckled and said, "Old Second, you go first. I will come back after I clean up this place." He raised his hand and threw a golden-red copper cauldron into the air. The lid of the cauldron flipped, and a ball of green flame was about to pour out. Although Lady Shan was powerless, she was in despair when she saw this thing. This flame was called the Emeraldine Flame. Once it was released, none of the disciples on the ship would survive. However, at this moment, a green light flew up and attached to the copper cauldron. It actually froze the treasure in the air, and the flame at the mouth of the cauldron was forced back. An indifferent voice sounded, "I don't care if you kill or rob people, but if you want to destroy the ship, have you asked for my permission?" Chapter 166. Sword plot for the Monster King. The 9 leaders Monster King originally planned to destroy this ocean state ship, but he didn't expect someone to interfere. Even his prized artifact, the Een-turning cauldron, was frozen in the air. From the looks of it, it seemed to be a true artifact. He couldn't help but be shocked. He hadn't seen many cultivators with true artifacts since he became Taoist, and all of them had profound cultivation. None of them were weaker than his true body, so he quickly took a few steps back and got into a stance with a cautious expression on his face. A ball of misty cloud rose from below, carrying up a handsome young Taoist with fluttering sleeves. The 9 leaders Monster King took a closer look, and he was shocked at first. Then, anger rose in his heart. This young Taoist was at most a mystic light realm cultivator, but he had to be so careful. He immediately felt embarrassed and said angrily, "Junior, you're courting death." With a roar, he took a step forward and threw a punch at Zhang Yan's face. He was a cultivator of strength, so when he threw this punch, a gust of strong wind instantly swept up. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised, and he made a hand sign. 365 drops of serene heavy water flew out of his head, and then they quickly turned around and fell down like snow and hail. The 9 liters Monster King thought that his body was strong, so he snorted and didn't dodge. He raised his fists and swung them at the heavy water. However, he gradually felt that something was wrong. In the beginning, he managed to shake off more than 10 drops of heavy water, but each drop of this heavy water weighed 1,000 catties. Not long after, his arms became numb and he could not withstand the force. His movements slowed down and a few drops of heavy water came in and hit his face. Immediately, his vision turned black, his nose was bruised and his eyes swollen. His stance became even more disorderly and he revealed an opening. Dozens of drops of heavy water mercilessly struck his chest. He felt as if he was struck by a heavy hammer, his chest tightened and his breath became short. There was even a mouthful of salty fishy taste in his throat. He hurriedly swallowed it down. He knew he couldn't force it, so he had no choice but to turn around and evade. Zhang Yan revealed a mocking expression. He was not going to show mercy. He pointed his finger and about 200 drops of heavy water chased after him. With a bang, they hit the back of Demon King 9 chiefs. Even though he had a body of iron, he could not withstand it. He spat out a mouthful of blood and staggered a few steps. Finally, he managed to stand up and did not fall from the cloud. Although those who cultivated the path of strength had a sturdy body and were not afraid of being killed, unless they reached the core transformation realm and could refine their internal organs into a lump of gold, they were most afraid of this kind of heavy blow that could shake their internal organs. When the other Demon King saw this, his face was also filled with bewilderment. He grabbed Lady Shan's collar and pulled her in front of him, shouting in a low voice, "Lady Shan, could it be that you've invited a helper?" Lady Shan also saw this scene. She had fought hard for a long time, and with the help of the disciples in the sect and the formation map, she was able to trap Demon King 9 liters. However, she knew that she might not be able to take him down. But when she saw Zhang Yan beat Demon King 9 chiefs to the point that he spat out blood and ran away, one could imagine the shock in her heart. She had already guessed that this person must be the distinguished guest of the Yin family that Xiao had mentioned. Seeing such a divine courage, she suddenly had a glimmer of hope in her heart to escape. But when she thought about it, she also sent Xiao to try to drive this person away, but the other party did not respond. He did not even help her just now. It was obvious that he did not care about her. She let out a long sigh and extinguished this thought. Demon King 9 chiefs wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and shouted, "Who cares who he is? Second brother, the fact that you and I are here must not be leaked. Quickly, let's kill this junior together." When he finished speaking, his expression became stern. He opened his mouth and spat out a black light. With a shake of the wind, it turned into a ebony stirring water about 7 feet long. After holding it in his hand, his courage was boosted and he aggressively rushed towards Zhang Yan. The Demon King, who was called Second Brother, also saw that the heavy water in Zhang Yan's hand was extremely powerful. It was not something that they could handle alone. He immediately shook out a cloth bag and put Lady Shan in it. Then, he chanted a spell and kept the cloth bag. Next, he took out his divine weapon, Caltrip's skyward rod, and attacked Zhang Yan. The two of them were originally one and did not need to communicate to understand each other. They immediately split up and attacked from both sides. Zhang Yan's expression was calm. With a flick of his sleeve, 365 drops of heavy water of serene swirled in the air. They converged into a long ink-like water and crashed into the body of the Demon King on the left. The Demon King had just suffered from the heavy water. Seeing this, he was shocked and didn't dare to take it head-on. He hurriedly waved the ebony pulp into a ball of light and shadow, barely resisting the heavy water. However, he was also pushed back by the seemingly continuous waves of heavy blows. The Demon King on the right saw a gap. With a loud roar, he leaped forward and swept the skyward rod in his hand. Wherever the rod passed, there was a dull explosion. Zhang Yan was not in a hurry. With a shake of his shoulder, a 600 feet long blazing golden light burst out from his head. Then, it fell down and tore through the air with a "chi-la" sound, sweeping towards the Demon King. The Demon King did not care at first. Who knew that when the golden light got close to him, it felt like thousands of knives were cutting at him at the same time. For a moment, he only felt that his skin was burning and stinging. He was shocked. Only then did he know how powerful it was. He quickly dodged, but he was too late. Half of his body was instantly brushed off a layer of blood. He could not help but scream and had no choice but to retreat. That black light spat out and actually refused to let him go. It was still chasing after him. He hurriedly used the heavenly rod in his hand to block it. A ball of black smoke came out from the heavenly rod and blocked the black light. With this gap, he quickly retreated a few steps and activated his Xian Qi. The injuries on his body were instantly healed. But he was also shocked. He thought that besides the strange black water droplets, this Taoist's light was actually so tyrannical. It was the first time in his life that he had seen such a tyrannical light. However, he tried hard to recall several times, but still could not figure out the origin of Zhang Yan. At this time, the Demon King on the left was forced to a corner by the serene in heavy water. He also had a belly full of anger. With a fierce heart, he slapped his hand a few times and pushed away a dozen drops of serene in heavy water. Then, he jumped out of the circle. With a roar, he took out a 5-colored coral stone and threw it at Zhang Yan. This stone was not big, but it flew extremely fast. It almost instantly arrived in front of Zhang Yan. Just as it was about to hit him, a sword light suddenly flew out from between his eyebrows. Dang! The stone was cut off. Zhang Yan sneered. His body turned into a long rainbow and flew up. In the blink of an eye, he was above the Demon King. With a shout, he took out a huge black inkstone and smashed it down on the Demon King's head. The Demon King hurriedly used the serene in heavy water in his hand to block it. Suddenly, he felt a huge force coming from his arms. For a moment, he could not stand on the clouds. His body involuntarily fell into the sea and drank a few mouthfuls of seawater. After sinking down for a few hundred feet, he recovered his breath and exerted all his strength to shake the inkstone to the side before leaping up to the surface of the sea. He'd just stuck his head out when he saw the 365 drops of serene in heavy water smashing down towards his face. His expression couldn't help but change greatly and he hurriedly pulled his head back. On the other side, the Demon King saw that the situation was not good. He also knew that he had to risk his life. Immediately, he roared and rushed up again. Zhang Yan did not seem to pay much attention to him. He still separated a mysterious light to greet him. The Demon King rushed forward and shook his hands. Both ends of the skyward rod produced a dense smoke. Then, he waved the divine weapon like a wheel, squeezing away all the mysterious light in front of him. Relying on his height and long legs, it only took a few steps to kill in front of Zhang Yan. Seeing that this time it was extremely smooth, he could not help but be overjoyed. Just as he was about to raise his rod to strike, he saw a sword light flying through the air. With a crack, it cut his shoulder. Immediately, it tore open a wound so deep that the bone could be seen. His body tilted to one side and the divine weapon in his hand almost fell out of his hand. He hurriedly used his Xian Qi to heal the wound. However, he felt a scorching heat appear around him. He looked up and looked around. He saw that the mysterious light on both sides was about to pinch him. Once he was surrounded, he was afraid that he would not be able to escape. His expression changed and he hurriedly retreated. At this time, the Pengyuan sect disciples on the sea boat all stood up, They saw that Zhang Yan stood on the cloud with a calm expression. The sword light danced, the heavy water swirled, and the golden fire mystic light surged in the air. He actually forced the two demon kings into a difficult situation. They could not help but be stunned. Xiao, who was standing among the crowd, was also stunned. Only now did she realize that she had misjudged him. How could this person be an ordinary cultivator? Even among the so-called elites in her memory, none of them could compare to him. Just now when Lady Shan was captured, she felt that the world was falling apart. Now that she saw a glimmer of hope, she wished that Zhang Yan could be stronger. However, in her heart, she was grumbling about why he did not make a move earlier. The two demon kings became more and more anxious as they fought. Although they were only the clones of Demon King 9 chiefs, other than the divine weapon in their hands, they also had a few powerful techniques. It was just that they had to be executed within a distance of 5 to 6 feet. Now that they were being forced to a distance by Zhang Yan, they could not get close to him. They could only risk being injured to attack him. Zhang Yan transformed into a beam of light and traveled hundreds of feet away. Once again, he forced the two of them to a stop. There was no way for them to catch up to him. They were also at a disadvantage because they did not have a suitable Dharma treasure. A turning cauldron was fixed in the air, and a rainbow coral was knocked down by the sword ball. They had no way to retrieve it. Lady Shan originally had a phoenix binding rope, but every Dharma treasure of Taihao school required a corresponding incantation. They could not control it, so they could not think of a way to defeat Zhang Yan. They could only brace themselves and continue to fight, hoping that they could wear down Zhang Yan in terms of strength. After reaching the Mystic Light realm, this was the first time Zhang Yan fought against a cultivator of this level. He discovered that the two demon kings did not seem tired at all. Even if they were injured, they would recover in the blink of an eye. He'd already discerned clearly that if he wanted to take down a demon cultivator of this level of cultivation, then unless he was able to succeed in a single strike, otherwise, it would be useless no matter how many times he struck. He narrowed his eyes and glanced at the Pengyuan sect disciple in the Ocean province. He knew that this was not the place to fight, so he patiently maintained this situation of no victory and no defeat. He slowly moved into the distance, preparing to lure the two demon kings to a secluded place where there was no one around to attack. Chapter 167. Magic slip extracting blood from the shell on the surface of the sea, light and qi intertwined and the wind and waves surged. From time to time, the sound of explosions and collisions could be heard from the rolling smoke. The two demon kings and Zhang Yan had been fighting for 2 hours. The two demon kings of 9 chieftains were secretly surprised. Usually, when they fought with Qi Dao cultivators, the outcome would be decided in a very short time. They did not expect this person to have such a long Qi meridian. Not only did he not seem to be tired, he seemed to be doing it with ease. Unknowingly, they were getting further and further away from the ship. Gradually, Zhang Yan pulled a distance away. As for the two monster kings, even if they were to wake up, they wouldn't take it to heart. Although Zhang Yan could block their combined attack, they might not be able to stop them if they wanted to escape. As long as the ship was still within their line of sight, there was no need to worry about anyone escaping. The people on the ship thought that Zhang Yan did not want to hurt them. They could not help but feel grateful. At this time, Zhang Yan had already released enough fog. The surface of the sea was covered in fog, and the fog around him was even thicker. He felt that no one could spy on him, and it was obvious that the time to strike had come. A murderous glint flashed in his eyes, and with a shake of his sleeve, he suddenly threw out an item. When the object flew out, it was initially a wooden pillar about 1 foot long. After a short while, it turned into a huge pillar with 3 talisman characters engraved on it. The pillar stood in the air. The golden light was dazzling. It was overflowing with sharp qi. It aimed at the demon king who was holding the facing heaven rod and released a ray of light. In an instant, it enveloped the demon king. Then, the huge pillar began to spin in the air. It was like a huge boulder rolling and making a rumbling sound. This magic weapon was the 7 absolute pillars that Zhang Yan had obtained from Ni Qianying. This pillar could release endless sword qi to slash at people. Ni Qianying didn't know how to use a sword, so she couldn't control the sword qi. She could only let the sword qi scatter randomly. In fact, she couldn't bring out the true power of this magic weapon. However, it was different in Zhang Yan's hands. He only needed to refine it slightly and he knew how to control it. The sword qi that was released formed a pattern, and when this treasure moved, it would release hundreds of sword qi. Even though each of them was not as sharp as the sword pellet, they were superior in that they were almost endless. The Demon King below was only barely able to resist under the pincer attack of the mystic light and sword pellet. At this moment, there seemed to be countless sword lights raining down from above, and he immediately felt the pressure increase greatly. He roused his spirits and waved the divine weapon in his hand like a ball of light and shadow. However, no matter how tight his defense was, this golden light that was like a rain of locusts was like quicksilver that flowed through all the openings. In less than the time of a few breaths, it had torn apart his clothes and caused blood to spray in all directions. Even if the Demon King used all his strength to activate his Xian technique, new injuries would appear before his original wounds could heal. He couldn't help but be shocked and thought to himself, how does this junior have so many tricks and treasures? Moreover, they are all extremely powerful. If we continue fighting, I'm afraid that old third and I will die here. I might as well retreat first and wait for Big Brother to come and find trouble with him another day. Thinking of this, he waved the skyward rod in his hand and shook off dozens of sword qi. He turned around and wanted to escape. When Zhang Yan saw this, he sneered. Since the 7 absolute pillars had the word absolute in it, how could he escape so easily? The Demon King had only taken a few steps when he realized that there was a ray of light blocking his way. He used the divine weapon to knock it, but it didn't budge at all. He hurriedly changed his direction but found that it was the same. His heart thumped, and he knew that things were not going well. Whistling sounds came from behind him as the hundreds and thousands of sword qi chased after him again. He had no choice but to raise the skyward rod again to fight it. However, as long as the 7 absolute pillars were intact, the sword qi would be endless, so how could he resist it? The Demon King screamed continuously, and there wasn't a piece of intact flesh on his body. Even if he didn't die immediately, he wasn't a threat for the time being. Zhang Yan took a few glances before focusing his attention on the other Demon King. He first stretched out his hand and raised the soul-calming inkstone in the air. He held it in and didn't spit it out, faintly intimidating the Demon King below. He then shook off the mystic light, and countless golden sparks fell like rain. The star's sword pellet turned into a long rainbow and flew down. It was already extremely strenuous for this Demon King to resist the serene heavy water. Now that almost all of Zhang Yan's methods were being directed at him, he was immediately flustered. He was repeatedly hit by the heavy water and somersaulted a few times on the cloud. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, the Demon King also had the intention to escape. Fear appeared in his heart, and his movements became sluggish. Immediately, Zhang Yan seized the opportunity. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and with a flip of his palm, the soul-calming inkstone fell down. With a bang, it hit the Demon King's forehead. Even with the power of the soul-calming inkstone, the Demon King's head was only bruised and bleeding. He was still injured but didn't die. At this time, if he waited for the Demon King to come back to his senses, he only needed to circulate his mystic art, and in a few breaths' time, he would be full of vigor again. However, Zhang Yan wouldn't give him this opportunity. With a point of his finger, the star's sword pellet turned into a white light, and in the blink of an eye, it circled the Demon King's neck dozens of times. However, Zhang Yan didn't expect the Demon King's neck to be so strong. When the star's sword pellet cut it, it actually made a grinding sound. After a few breaths' time, only half of it was broken. It seemed that when the Demon King woke up, it still might not be able to kill him. Zhang Yan was afraid that things would change if he delayed. His eyes sharpened, and he took out a broadsword from his sleeve. He took a step forward, raised the broadsword high above his head, and with a loud shout, he chopped down with all his strength. With a "kacha" sound, the Demon King's head was cut off. But even with his head in two, the Demon King still didn't die. From the severed neck, a black gas came out and connected the head to the head. The body kept struggling, as if it was trying to connect the head back. Zhang Yan smiled coldly. In his heart, he silently chanted a spell and took out the 9 subduing demon slip. As soon as this slip appeared, the sky was filled with ethereal music. In the dense mist, a 3 feet long jade slip appeared. It was bright and clean, and it was wrapped in a layer of flowing clouds. It emitted a dazzling brilliance, as if it was a divine immortal object. With the appearance of this demon slip, not to mention Zhang Yan being so careful, even if someone accidentally saw it, they wouldn't suspect that it was a demonic artifact. At this time, the demon slip smelled blood. Without Zhang Yan's control, it turned into a stream of light and drilled into the Demon King's severed neck. It greedily devoured the rich essence, blood, and flesh. The Demon King's body, which was originally as hard as metal, slowly shriveled, and gradually decayed like a dead tree. Under the fierce sea wind, it didn't take long for it to turn into countless flying ashes that drifted away. With a flash of light, the demon slip flew out. As if it was still not satisfied, it flew towards the Demon King's head and drilled into its nostrils. After a few breaths, it sucked it clean. Only then did it make a chiming sound and return to Zhang Yan's hand. Zhang Yan temporarily hid it in his sleeve. He made a grabbing motion and turned the sack around to deal with the last Demon King. With a wave of his hand, he put away the 7 terminal stakes. However, at this moment, a sword chi flew out of the stakes and disappeared without a trace. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows slightly. He guessed that the sword chi might have flown to its original owner. However, he didn't take it to heart. It was more important to deal with the matter at hand first. This Demon King had been trapped by the 7 terminal stakes for such a long time. There was almost no part of his body that was intact. However, he was still standing very steadily. Their avatars were telepathically connected, so he knew that Zhang Yan had already killed one of his avatars. He was also very afraid. He hurriedly said, "Fellow Taoist, please don't attack. I've offended you this time. Please let me go." How could Zhang Yan believe such nonsense? If he let this demon go today, would he come back with the real body to trouble him in the future? Since he had already attacked, he didn't plan to be merciful. Thus, he didn't answer and rolled up his sleeves expressionlessly. Een heavy water, golden fire mystic light, stars sword pill, and soul calming inkstone all fell together. This Demon King's vitality was already greatly injured. He didn't have time to recover. Now that he was under a fierce attack from Zhang Yan, he couldn't withstand it for long. The soul-calming inkstone hit him hard on the head, and he fell with a loud cry. Zhang Yan threw out the 9 subduing devil slip. Using the same method as before, he absorbed all the chi and soul of the Demon King. The corpse turned into a pile of ashes and dissipated, leaving only a gray cloth bag. Zhang Yan first put away the cloth bag, and then recalled the devil slip that had absorbed all the chi and blood. However, when the devil slip returned to his hand, his expression slightly changed. He felt as if a stream of chi was drilling into his palm. He knew that this devil slip was feeding him its chi. However, this wasn't the time to cultivate. He shook his wrist and put the devil slip into his sleeve. Then, he got up and flew back to the sea boat. After flying for a short while, a dot of green light flew back by itself and returned to the space between his eyebrows. Xiao was standing at the bow of the ship. Suddenly, she saw that the turning furnace, which had been fixed in the air, suddenly lost its support and fell down. She quickly stepped forward and caught it in her hand. A ray of light landed on the deck. Zhang Yan stood still and glanced at Xiao. He saw that it was only a low-level spirit tool. He didn't take it seriously. He shook his sleeve and took out the cloth bag. He poured out the contents and released the unconscious Lady Shan. Without saying a word, he turned around and walked away. Xiao saw Lady Shan rolling down the deck. She couldn't help but cry out in alarm. She hurriedly went forward to check if her wife was breathing. Seeing that her wife was safe and sound, she felt relieved. She raised her head and looked at Zhang Yan's back. She plucked up her courage and asked, "Taoist Zhang, please wait. May I know your name?" Zhang Yan didn't seem to hear her. He continued to walk back to his cabin. After returning to his room, he sat down on the bed. He thought about the victory just now, but he wasn't satisfied. He had used all his skills in this battle. Although he won easily in the end, if his sword sphere was sharper, he wouldn't have to use other skills. He could have just used one sword strike to decide the winner. However, how sharp the sword sphere was depended on how profound his cultivation was. If he was at the third level of the mystic light realm, his mystic light would be condensed and he would be able to cut off his opponent's head with one sword strike. After thinking for a while, he smiled. He saw his own shortcomings in this battle. He had to find a way to make up for it in the future. He turned around and looked at the vast blue sea outside the window. In another 10 days, he would be able to open the first level of the Dragon Country's ship. At that time, he would be able to use it to travel in the open sea and wouldn't be restricted by the ship. At the same time, on an isolated cold peak tens of thousands of miles away, a woman in white was sitting with her eyes closed. Suddenly, a ray of sword light flew over. She opened her beautiful eyes and stretched out her finger to circle the sword light. After observing it carefully for a long time, she stood up and looked to the east. She put her hand on the long sword on her waist and her dress fluttered in the morning wind. She muttered to herself, "Is it in the East Sea?" Chapter 168. The Xian cultivation technique creates waves on the ocean. The 9 captions charm slip floated in front of him. It was enveloped by an auspicious cloud that looked like celestial spiritual energy. Auspicious mist shrouded it, and rays of colorful light fell from it. Zhang Yan sat on the bed, his eyes drooping. He breathed in and out through his nose and mouth. Strands of essence energy floated out from the jade slip and were absorbed into his body to be refined. He followed the method recorded in the enlightened way, comprehending the divine contract, and used all the essence qi to nourish his body. Although the 9 absorption demon scroll had swallowed the essence energy of the 2 third-level mystic light realm Yao Kings, it didn't give him much. However, it was enough for him to step into the first door of this technique. About 12 hours later, the essence energy flowed through his body, shook his meridians, and merged together. A ball of essence energy appeared under his stomach. When he looked inside, he found that this essence energy was like a chicken. It seemed to be ethereal yet real, and there were flashes of white light in it. According to the enlightened divine contract, after obtaining this ball of essence energy, he had just now entered the first level of this technique. He moved his arms and legs and felt that his body was slightly different from before, but he couldn't tell what was different. After thinking for a while, he took out a magic sword from his sleeve, formed a hand seal, and made it fly into the air. Then, he slashed at his arm. With a muffled sound, he felt his arm go slightly numb. He raised his sleeve and saw that there was only a red mark on his skin. He wasn't injured at all. Joy appeared in his eyes. This magic sword originally belonged to Qin Qizhong of the Yuanyang sect. Although it was just a normal magic treasure, it had been carefully made. If he didn't have the mystic light protecting him, this slash wouldn't have been able to kill him, but it would have drawn blood instead of being so numb. His eyes flashed, and he stood up. He grabbed the hilt of the sword and slashed at his arm a few times, but it didn't move at all. Soon after, he abandoned the magic sword and activated the sword pill hidden in his ancestral aperture. A sword ray flashed, and this time, it easily tore open a wound on his arm. Dark red blood flowed out. He stared at the wound and activated the mental cultivation method of the divine contract. The essence in his abdomen warmed up and spat out a wisp of spiritual energy toward the wound. In just a moment, it was as good as new. He let out a sigh of relief and slowly sat down. He thought that this was indeed a technique of strength. All the cultivation was on the physical body. As long as the chi of essence in his abdomen did not dissipate, his physical body would not die. Moreover, as his cultivation level increased, his body would also become stronger. If he practiced to a high level, sooner or later, he would be able to be like the clone of the demon king of 9 stallions and have a body of steel. It would be considered as a way to protect his life. However, he also knew that any technique depended on the person using it. Wasn't the clone of 9 chiefs demon king killed by him all the same? Even if he encountered a sword cultivator of the same cultivation level as him, he wouldn't be able to block it if the sword landed on him. Therefore, the only way was to increase his cultivation level. Just as he was pondering, he felt the ship beneath him pause slightly. Evidently, it had stopped. Along the way, every time they reached an island, the sea boat would stop for a period of time and hang the flag of the island on the side of the boat. This way, the rest of the journey would be smooth. Therefore, he didn't find it strange. However, at this moment, he heard someone knocking on the door and said, "Is the honorable guest in? Jing Shu would like to see you." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and opened the door. He smiled and said, "Since Steward Jing has something to say, you can come in for a chat." Steward Jing walked in carefully. Now, there was still a hint of fear in his eyes when he looked at Zhang Yan. He first bowed and took out an item and held it on top of his head. He said, "Honorable guest, I have a treasure here. It was used by the demon king of 9 stallions that day. Lady Shan accidentally obtained it. Lady Shan said that this item should belong to you. That day, the servant girl took it for no reason and was taught a lesson by her. Now, she ordered me to give it to you. Also, she wants to personally thank you for saving her life that day. Is that okay?" Zhang Yan looked at it and found that it was the Yin-changing cauldron. He had seen through it a long time ago. Although it was a treasure, it was made from the 5-element god sand and was very crude. It could only gather some jade-yin fire in one place and use it to attack enemies. It was good against cultivators under the mystic light realm, but it was useless to him. He couldn't help but mock it in his heart. It was just a low-grade spirit artifact. Why did it have to be so serious? He had seen many treasures, so his standards were very high. He didn't put this item in his heart. What he didn't know was that although the demon king of 9 stallions called himself the demon king, he was still a wandering cultivator and was very poor. Even his divine weapon was formed from his life essence. It was already not bad for a clone to have such a treasure. Zhang Yan said calmly, "This item is useless to me. Take it back and give it to Lady Shan. Just say that I gave it to her. As for thanking her, there's no need for that. I just did it for her convenience." Steward Jing quickly agreed. Then, he looked at Zhang Yan's expression and said carefully, "Honorable guest, there's one more thing. This is the territory of the Gue Leaning Palace, and Lady Shan has many fellow disciples here. The ship needs to stop for half a day, so she asked me to come and ask if it's inconveniencing you." Zhang Yan thought for a while. Today, he had spent almost an entire day cultivating the enlightened Tao comprehending divine contract, so he didn't have time to refine the ship of Dragon Country. According to the speed of the ship, it would take at most 9 days to reach Sealed Prayer Island. Based on the speed of the ship, it would take at most 1 or 2 days to open the first layer of restriction on the ship. 1 day wouldn't make a difference, so he didn't mind. He nodded and said, "Steward Jing, go and make the arrangements. However, we must depart the day after tomorrow." Hearing this, Steward Jing's face lit up with joy. He bowed repeatedly and went out of the door. Then, he went to report to Lady Shan. After Lady Shan woke up and learned that she was saved by Zhang Yan, she wanted to pay him a visit to thank him. However, after hearing from that Zhang Yan kept people at arm's length, she didn't dare to be presumptuous. Today, she took advantage of the time when the ship was docked and used the excuse of returning the Yin turning furnace to test him. Now that she had been informed by Steward Jing, she understood that Zhang Yan didn't want to see her. Inexplicably, she felt a hidden bitterness in her heart. She was extremely beautiful and had many handsome men chasing after her. She was also proud and arrogant. She didn't expect that this person didn't care about her at all. She couldn't help but sigh. She ordered Xiao to put away the turning furnace and left the cabin. However, when she came to the deck, before she could get off the ship, she heard a sweet laughter from afar. "Junior sister Shan, long time no see. You must have missed me." A green shadow flashed in front of her. It was a charming woman with a pearl hairpin in her hair. The woman held her hand and looked her up and down. She said happily, "Junior sister Shan, you look unharmed. You must have killed Demon King 9 leaders." Lady Shan hesitated for a moment. Just as she was about to speak, Xiao, who was beside her, said anxiously, "Demon King 9 leader's clone is dead." The woman's beautiful eyes brightened. She praised, "Junior sister, you've done a great service for the sect this time." Lady Shan glared at Xiao. She didn't want to take credit for killing Demon King 9 leader's clone. She wanted to argue, but she didn't know if Zhang Yan would allow her to tell the truth. Therefore, she could only say vaguely, "This time, I got help from a benefactor. That's why I was lucky enough to escape." "Benefactor?" The woman was startled. She chuckled and said, "Anyway, the Demon King is dead. I wonder if Junior sister obtained any treasure from Demon King 9 leaders." When Xiao heard this, she hurriedly took out the turning cauldron like she was presenting a treasure. She proudly showed it to the woman and said, "Look." When the woman saw it, she covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Turning cauldron? It really belongs to Demon King 9 leaders. Junior sister, you've done a great service. You'll definitely win the favor of the master. Maybe I'll need to rely on you in the future." Lady Shan didn't want to dwell on this topic. Therefore, she changed the topic. "Senior sister Kai, is senior brother Zhu around?" Senior sister Kai's beautiful eyes turned and looked at Lady Shan deeply. She said, "Junior sister, why are you looking for him?" Lady Shan said indifferently, "I borrowed senior brother's binding phoenix vine earlier. I want to return it to him." Senior sister Kai covered her mouth and giggled. She went forward and patted Lady Shan. She said, "I was wondering how you could kill Demon King 9 leader's clone so easily. So the benefactor is senior brother Zhu. With such a treasure on you, you really have to thank senior brother Zhu." She then sighed regretfully and said, "But junior sister Shan is a step too late. Senior brother Zhu has just left. He has already gone to Sealed Prayer Island. In a few days, he will go to the outer endless sea." Lady Shan was puzzled. "To the outer endless sea?" Senior sister Kai smiled and said, "Junior sister has been drifting on the sea for the past few days. Therefore, I don't know many major events have happened in the Eastern Sea." Lady Shan was surprised. "What major events?" Senior sister Kai counted with her fingers and said, "Let me tell you. The first one is the divine fire meteor that fell from the sky 10 days ago. No one knows how many star stones were scattered on the vast Eastern Sea. You should know that this is a good material for making treasures. Some of them were even bought by rich people the moment they appeared in the celestial market. Junior sister didn't see any of them. It was really a headache for me. The second one is a cultivator who returned from overseas. He said that he saw a 5-colored glow in the depths of the Eastern Sea. It is suspected that an immortal mansion treasure has appeared. However, the news is vague. We don't know where it came from." At this point, senior sister Kai's face showed a hint of excitement. She said, "The last one is the abandoned disciple of the Southern Flower sect, Tao Zhenhong. I heard that he is going to open a sect in the outer endless sea soon. He invited many friends to attend the ceremony. I heard that this time, even the 18 demon kings from the outer endless sea will go to support him." Lady Shan had heard of this Tao Zhenhong. This person could be considered an extraordinary person. It was said that because his master died young, he was bullied by his fellow disciples in the sect. Later, he broke out of the sect in a rage. However, this person was extremely talented. When he was learning Tao, he also learned many superior Xian techniques. He also obtained the orthodoxy of an ancient deity. His cultivation was not weak. The Southern Flower sect sent out many masters, but they still couldn't do anything to him. For more than 100 years, he had been recruiting disciples and opening sects all over the Donghua continent. However, every time, the Nanhua sect would send people to annihilate them. However, each time, the Nanhua sect would rise again and again. This time, he had come to the Donghai where the Nanhua sect was not as powerful. There would be a good show to watch. Senior Sister Kai's face showed a look of yearning. She said, I heard that this Tao Zhenren is handsome and romantic. He is a rare beauty. Junior sister, since you are so familiar with senior brother Chu, I also want to travel to the outer endless sea this time and see the elegance of this Tao Zhenren. It's just that I don't have a sea boat. Why don't we borrow junior sister's east wind and go to Sealed Island together? Chapter 169. Abduction by force. After traveling for another 9 days, the Yin clan's ship successfully arrived at Chifeng Island without any obstacles. Chifeng Island was shaped like a crescent moon, and there was a curved mountain ridge that ran through the entire island. At the foot of the mountain, there were several huge broken tablets that were used to offer sacrifices to the heavens, and they were covered with moss. From afar, one could see hundreds of ships moored along the coast. Their sails covered the sky, and their masts stood tall like a forest. After leaving this island, one would see a vast ocean to the east. Ferocious beasts ran rampant, and demons were everywhere. Compared to the coastal waters where various forces fought, it could be considered a wild land. Often, one would not see a single island for more than a month. Furthermore, there were 18 demon kings of the outer sea, each of which occupied one side. Even the 10 great sects of Xian men would not easily provoke them. Steward Jing steered the ship and found a berth to slowly stop. Senior Marshal Sister Kai stood on the deck and looked around. She saw many cultivators flying back and forth in the sky. Their fleeting lights were erratic, and there were rows upon rows of buildings on the shore. It was actually very lively. She couldn't help but exclaim, there are probably thousands of cultivators gathered here. Most of them must be heading to the outer endless sea in search of that fateful encounter. She then turned around and smiled at Lady Shan, who was standing at the side. Junior sister, if you want to go to the outer sea, you need a flying ship. Nowadays, there are not many people who have such a ship. I heard that before senior brother Zhu went to the sea, he spent thousands of spirit shells to buy a mysterious snake 9 orifices great sea ship from the celestial market. It's easy to travel across the ocean. However, I don't have that kind of influence. Everything depends on you, junior sister. After saying that, she covered her mouth and giggled. Lady Shan knew what she meant. Pengyuan sect and Taihao school had a close relationship, and their relationship was also very deep. Pengyuan sect's startling heavenly palace could help Taihao school's disciples cleanse themselves of impurities. Therefore, it was common for them to form cultivation companions. With her status and the merit of killing Demon King 9 chiefs, her sect would definitely pass down an even better technique that could allow her to communicate with a higher level of the celestial palace. She also knew that senior brother Chu from Taihao school was interested in her. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lent her the divine binding vine. Originally, she had noticed that senior brother Zhu was also extraordinary and had an outstanding appearance. Thus, she was somewhat tempted. However, for some reason, after witnessing Zhang Yan fight against the 2 Demon King's avatars, her horizons had been broadened. She felt that this senior brother Zhu was only a so-so. Thus, she no longer had the slightest bit of interest in him. She only hoped that she could return the Phoenix binding vine as soon as possible and return to the sect to cultivate in seclusion. Marshall's sister Kai was originally teasing her, but when she saw that Lady Shan seemed to be in low spirits, she felt puzzled. While the two of them were talking on the deck, Zhang Yan was in the cabin refining the Chi-Dragon ship. Now, he only needed half a day to refine the ship and open the first restriction. However, not long after, he felt something pulsating in his sleeve. Moreover, it seemed to be in a hurry. He unconsciously frowned and took it out to take a look. It turned out to be a jade slip that was suffused with a green light. He recognized that it was the disciple jade slip that Pu Yuzi from Heaven Mending Pavilion had given him. He didn't expect it to move at this time. Moreover, it was pulsating non-stop in his hand as if it had already found its target. He hurriedly left the cabin and stood on the deck. When he saw Lady Shan and Marshall's sister Kai, he only slightly bowed his head in greeting. Lady Shan hurriedly curtsied and said, "Huizhen greets fellow Taoist." Because Zhang Yan didn't go out these past few days, and the ship was big enough, Marshall's sister Kai didn't know that there was such a person on the ship. When she suddenly saw him come out, she couldn't help but feel a bit strange. She also saw Dan Huizhen's cautious appearance, as if she was a bit afraid of this person. She unconsciously frowned and walked in front of Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan originally wanted to use the jade slip to sense his position, but for some reason, when he walked onto the deck, the jade slip stopped moving. Just as he was about to get off the ship to search, he suddenly saw a green-clothed woman suddenly standing in front of him. She glanced at him and said, "What's the matter, fellow Taoist?" Marshall's sister Kai shouted, "Who are you? Why are you on this ship?" She spoke rather rudely, and Lady Shan's beautiful face paled in fright. Although she didn't know where Zhang Yan came from, he killed 2 Demon King's clones by himself, so how could he be of ordinary origin? She quickly stepped forward and grabbed Marshall's sister Kai, and then apologized to Zhang Yan, "I'm sorry to have offended you, fellow Taoist. We still have something to do, so we'll leave now. Goodbye." After saying that, she didn't care about Marshall's sister Kai and dragged her to the side. Marshall's sister Kai was also puzzled. After getting off the ship, she shook off Lady Shan's hand and said unhappily, "Marshall's sister, what do you mean by this?" Lady Shan hesitated for a moment, and felt that she could only tell the truth, so she sighed and said, "Senior Marshall's sister, you don't know, if it wasn't for this Taoist, I would have died in the hands of Demon King 9 leaders." Before she finished, Xiao suddenly raised her voice and shouted, "Wife, why do you have to do this? If it wasn't for you, how could we eliminate the Demon King? This Taoist just happened to be at the right time and happened to lend you a hand." She didn't wait for Lady Shan to continue and said to Marshall's sister Kai, "This Taoist is a distinguished guest of Clan Yin. Speaking of which, he also wants to go to the outer endless sea, and it just so happens that he's traveling with you, so he conveniently boarded this ship." Marshall's sister Kai said in surprise, "Oh, I was wondering why Junior Marshall's sister is so considerate, so it turns out that you owe him a favor. But Junior Marshall's sister, you don't have to be so humble. At most, you can ask Senior Marshall Brother Zhu to take him out to sea as well to return the favor." Lady Shan frowned and glanced at Xiao. She wanted to say something, but was stopped by Marshall's sister Kai, who said, "You're right to listen to me. I've seen many people like him. Besides, how could he coincidentally board your ship? And coincidentally save you, Junior Marshall's sister? It's obvious that he got the news beforehand and helped you secretly. I think his intentions are not pure, and he's thinking of how to blackmail you with a favor in the future." Do you think I can't tell? If you get entangled with this kind of person for too long, you won't be able to get rid of him. Bring him to Senior Marshall Brother Zhu some other day and let him know how powerful he is." Lady Shan didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and said, "Senior Marshall's sister, it's not what you think. All right, it's decided then." Marshall's sister Kai then said to Xiao, "You have to keep a close eye on your wife. I'll go meet a few fellow Taoists and find out where Senior Marshall Brother Zhu is." Xiao hurriedly agreed. Marshall's sister Kai patted Lady Shan's hand again, then turned around and left. After she left, Lady Shan scolded, "Xiao, why did you stop me from telling the truth? Xiao said anxiously, wife, the sect master will definitely spread the news that you killed the demon king. If you admit that you didn't kill the demon, then, although she was anxious for Lady Shan, she also harbored selfish motives. Only when Lady Shan became the sect master would she be able to enter the sect and become a disciple. She wasn't willing to be a maid for the rest of her life, so how could she be willing to let Lady Shan reveal the truth? When Lady Shan heard this, her heart trembled. After a moment of silence, she gently nodded. Zhang Yan stood on the sea boat for a while. Seeing that the jade slip didn't respond, he decided to disembark and investigate. He leaped into the flight light and shuttled back and forth a few times. In about a quarter of an hour, he had traveled the entire island, but the jade slip didn't show any abnormalities again. He was astonished. Could it be that the person has already left? However, he didn't see a sky-soaring ship leave the sea, and it didn't leave either. This meant that the person was still on the island. Right at this moment, the green slip in his hands suddenly moved in a certain direction. His eyes flashed, and a flight light flew in that direction. However, when he arrived, the green slip didn't show any activity. He looked all around, and saw that this place was actually a floating pavilion immortal market. There were buildings and temples on both sides, and there were banners on top of them. It seemed like a place where medicinal pills and magical tools were being sold. He immediately understood that these pavilions had restrictions placed on them, making it impossible for outsiders to pry into the details inside. The person he was looking for was definitely coming and going in these pavilions, and that was why the green slip wasn't working at all. He couldn't help but curse inwardly. This heaven-mending pavilion could be considered one of the 10 great sects of the mysterious gate, yet the magical tool they used to find suitable disciples was actually so unreliable. If he missed this opportunity, he didn't know when he would be able to repay this favor. For him, being able to find this person without any mishaps was the best. If one day, he were to fight with someone and suddenly discover that the person he was looking for was the person he was looking for, then it would create a lot of unnecessary trouble. Since that was the case, he just had to wait here. After waiting for about the time it took to drink a cup of tea, a group of male and female cultivators walked out from a simple building on the east side. These 10 or so people walked out while talking and laughing. Their cultivations weren't high, and the people at the very front all had arrogance in their eyes. Their clothes were bright, and they all had magical swords on them. With a single glance, anyone could tell that they weren't ordinary cultivators. The jade slip in Zhang Yan's hand also rustled as if it wanted to fly out of his hand. He wasn't sure which one of them the jade slip was looking for, so he smiled and loosened his hand, letting the jade slip search on its own. The jade slip flew into the air and turned into a green light. It knocked against the head of a pretty and naive girl around 13 or 14 years old, and then flew back into Zhang Yan's hand. Aya! The girl held her head and looked over with a wronged expression. The group of cultivators stared blankly at first, then they glared at Zhang Yan. Among them, a young cultivator stood out with a calm face. His hand pressed against his magical sword and shouted, "Where did this Taoist come from? How can you recklessly attack and injure people?" According to his original temperament, he would have already pulled out his sword and stepped forward. However, he saw that Zhang Yan's appearance wasn't ordinary. Moreover, just by standing there, there was a faint formless might. It was clear that he wasn't someone to be trifled with, so he didn't act rashly. Zhang Yan acted as if he didn't hear what he said. He only sized up the girl's body and was astonished in his heart. No matter how he looked at her, he didn't feel that this girl's aptitude was that high. Perhaps it could only be said that she was suitable for the heaven-mending pavilion? That young cultivator saw that Zhang Yan wasn't paying attention to him, and felt even more angry. He shouted, "Hey, do you think that people from our True Chengyu temple are easy to bully?" "Oh. You are people from True Chengyu temple?" Zhang Yan finally reacted. He looked up and down at this person a few times, and the corner of his mouth revealed a sneer. He didn't expect that the other party was a disciple from True Chengyu temple. If they were from a small sect, then he would have directly revealed his identity as a disciple of the Qinsang school and asked to take this girl away. He reckoned that they wouldn't dare to do anything. Although it was rare for disciples from large sects to steal disciples from other sects, it wasn't unheard of. Disciples from small sects mostly swallowed their anger. However, the other party came from true Chengyu Temple, so he couldn't deal with them using normal methods. This sect relied on its foundation in the ocean, and there was even a heavenly passage person who had cultivated for several thousand years overseeing the sect. They considered themselves to be the number one sect on the ocean, and never placed the 10 great sects in their eyes. Therefore, Zhang Yan didn't even need to find an excuse. He immediately shouted, "So what if you're from true Chengyu Temple? Today, I'm looking for you." After he finished speaking, a sword ray flew out from between his eyebrows like a waterfall. Chapter 170. When this sword light flew out, it was bright but not brilliant, like the moonlight sprinkling down. There were a total of 9 cultivators present, and at this moment, they all felt that the swords in their hands seemed to be slightly heavy. Golden light flashed in front of them, and a dense cold air rushed toward their cheeks. They quickly retreated in horror. Only when they retreated 10 steps away did the sword light suddenly disappear. Zhang Yan stood in the same place without moving. His expression did not change, as if he had not attacked just now. "Where's Chu-er? Where did junior sister Chu-er go?" A female cultivator in this group of cultivators exclaimed. Only now did they realize that one of their fellow sect members had disappeared. There was no need to think that it was Zhang Yan's doing. The young cultivator in the lead was immediately enraged and shouted, "It must be this person who captured junior sister Chu-er. Fellow sect members, don't let him escape." He shouted and pointed forward with his finger. The flying sword beside him flew out of its sheath with a clang and went straight for Zhang Yan. When the disciples beside him heard his shout, they did not hesitate and also formed hand seals. Their swords all came out of their sheaths, and in an instant, a total of 8 sword lights flew in the air and slashed toward Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan faintly smiled. He did not use any method. He just waved his sleeve, and a blue profound light shot toward those swords. With a series of crisp sounds, those swords were all broken in half and fell to the ground. Seeing this scene, the disciples of the Chongyue True Temple were stunned on the spot and did not know what to do. The strongest among them was only at the 2nd level of clear qi, so when had they seen such a method? Moreover, when that profound light appeared, they immediately knew that the other party was a profound light realm cultivator. His cultivation was far above theirs, and it was not something they could resist. Zhang Yan's original plan was to leave after he succeeded. He reckoned that these Chongyue True Temple disciples wouldn't be able to catch up to him, nor would they be able to investigate his identity. But after he struck out with his sword earlier, he seemed to have thought of something and changed his mind at the last moment. He stretched out his hand and pointed upwards as he said with a smile, "Do you see that ridge? If you are not satisfied, you can come find me there." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned into a streak of light and flew away. The disciples of Chengyu True Temple looked at each other in dismay. The young cultivator clenched his teeth and said, "Junior sister Chu-er was kidnapped by this Taoist for no reason. This is clearly a slap to the face of our Chengyu True Temple. We can't just let this matter go. The few of you wait here. I'm going to report to Marshal Uncle and demand justice." Zhang Yan came to the top of the mountain ridge and pressed down on the cloud. He chose a flat land and took out a gray pouch from his sleeve. He poured out the pouch and the captured girl fell out. Her eyes were closed and she was unconscious. This cloth bag was also obtained from 9 chieftains Demon King. At that time, he just casually kept it. He didn't expect it to be put to use so quickly. It was very convenient to use it to kidnap people. Zhang Yan knew that the girl would naturally wake up when the time came, so he didn't care about her. He just stood on the mountain ridge and looked into the distance. His expression showed that he was deep in thought. When he used the sword just now, he originally wanted to use the sword pellet to break all the people's magic swords. However, when he used it, he was surprised to find that the true consciousness in the sword was actually stronger than before. It was even closer to him when he communicated with it. At that time, he had the intention to give it a try, so he temporarily transformed the sharp and hard energy into a gentle force and struck the scabbard. Those magic swords seemed to be unharmed on the surface, but they'd actually been shattered from the inside, so he only used a strand of billowing cloud profound light to completely break them. The sword pellet was different from magic treasures. When it was released, it needed to be attached with one's profound light. Other than the quality of the sword pellet itself, the level of cultivation was also a factor that determined the strength of the sword pellet. After Zhang Yan reached the second level of the profound light realm, although he could change the profound light between hard and soft according to his will, he couldn't do this with the sword pellet. It seemed that the sword pellet didn't accept it. However, for some reason, he only succeeded today. He thought back carefully. This sword pellet true consciousness was constantly being nurtured in his chest, but it didn't grow. However, after fighting with people these few days, it actually grew. It was obvious that only by tempering himself in battle could he nurture this true sense. Thinking about this, he suddenly came to a realization. No wonder most of the disciples of Shaoqing sect would make some strong enemies for themselves when they went out. So it was because of this. The impression of the disciples of Shaoqing sect was that they were arrogant and looked down on everyone. They would kill people with a flying sword if they didn't agree with them. Thinking about it now, these disciples were all carefully selected, so how could they be so shallow? Even if there were one or two disciples like this, how could all of them be like this? It was obvious that it was intentional. As a sword cultivator, only by constantly fighting with others could one's true consciousness in the sword grow at the fastest speed until it reached the highest level and formed a true spirit. Once it reached this step, the sword pellet in one's hand would be equivalent to a true artifact. How many people could block it? A bright light flashed through Zhang Jie's eyes. The sword spirit was honed through fighting with others. It started with fighting, and it also ended with fighting. Today's benefits were actually the results of fighting with Lu Gu and 9 leaders Demon King. He thought about it. It looked like he had to find an opponent for himself. Only by making an enemy could he force himself to keep moving forward. However, this enemy couldn't be too strong or too weak. It couldn't be as unrestrained as the Shaoqing sect and didn't care if it would end in the future. This Chongyue True Temple was a good choice. Firstly, this sect had never taken the 10 sects seriously, and their foundation was in the outer seas. They definitely wouldn't come to the Donghua continent to find trouble with him in the future. They were undoubtedly a great target. Even if he turned them upside down, when he returned to the sect in the future, no one would say that he wasn't one. On the contrary, they would say that he had helped the Donghua continent regain face. However, when he thought about this, he frowned. The girl that he caught really didn't have a high aptitude, and she didn't even have the cultivation to open her meridians. She was walking at the back of the group just now, so she definitely wasn't a direct disciple. He didn't know if the Chongyue True Palace would make a big fuss over her. The girl had already woken up a moment ago. Seeing that Zhang Yan didn't pay attention to her after catching her, and he didn't look like a vicious person, she said timidly, "Priest, why did you catch me?" Zhang Yan looked at her and said, "I saw that you look pretty and have a good aptitude, so I wanted to send you to a senior to cultivate." Hearing this, the girl panicked and said, But I already have a master. If the master blames me, what should I do?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "With me here, you don't need to worry about your master." He took out the jade scroll from his sleeve. He didn't have time to look at it in detail just now, but now that he looked at it, he saw a technique floating on top. However, since Pu Yuzi was willing to let him look at this technique, he naturally wasn't afraid that he would look at it, so he gave it a few glances. With a glance, he felt that it was a bit troublesome. Back then, he promised Pu Yuzi that he would teach this technique to this disciple that he found before leaving. However, this was clearly a technique for opening meridians. If he wanted to cultivate it to perfection, he still needed to find the jade elixir essence pool. However, in the vast outer seas, where would he go to find it? It seemed like he could only temporarily keep this girl by his side. He casually threw the jade scroll to the girl and said, "I know you want to leave. That's simple." The technique on top is the heart technique of the Mysterious Gate's 10 Great Sects, Heaven Mending Pavilion. If you can cultivate it to the basic level, then I can let you go. The girl carefully received the jade scroll. She saw that although Zhang Yan's expression was calm, his tone had an unquestionable meaning. She didn't know what the Mysterious Gate's 10 Great Sects were, but she knew that she couldn't disobey this person. Moreover, after hearing that she could leave after cultivating this technique, she obediently flipped through it. After looking at it a few times, she began to revolve her primordial energy according to the method of the scroll. In less than the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the green scroll suddenly trembled slightly and automatically leaped towards the space between her eyebrows. Countless profound techniques passed through her mind, and a warm current was produced as it guided the aura of her entire body. Gradually, she forgot everything around her as her mind was completely immersed. Zhang Yan glanced at her from the side, but he didn't pay attention to her anymore. He took out the ship embryo and continued to refine it so that he could leave for the open sea. After about 4 hours, the sky gradually darkened. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked towards the starry night sky. He saw a blue rainbow with a rumbling sound piercing through the sky. Then, an old man with white hair and black eyebrows appeared in front of him. He coldly snorted and looked at Zhang Yan with a gloomy expression. He said, "You must be the one who kidnapped my sect's disciple, right?" Zhang Yan stood up, flung his sleeves, and calmly admitted, "That's right." The old man looked at the girl who was meditating not far away and frowned. He said, "What is fellow Taoist's intention?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This female disciple of your sect caught the eye of a senior expert, and he wants to take her as his disciple. I owe him a favor, so I have no choice but to repay it. I was also afraid that your sect wouldn't let her go, so I could only act rashly." The old man's eyes flashed. He stared at Zhang Yan's face and asked, "May I know which sect fellow Taoist is from?" Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said in a deep voice, "I'm a disciple of the Qinsang school." The old man was startled at first, then a look of understanding appeared on his face. He laughed coldly and said, "I was wondering why you kidnapped someone for no reason. So it's to cause trouble for the Chongyue True Temple. Since that's the case, why bother borrowing? However, this is the open sea, not the Donghua continent. Fellow Taoists should consider carefully." How could the old man be willing to believe what Zhang Yan said about catching the eye of a senior expert? Gu Chu's aptitude was clearly not high, and her appearance was only above average. The other party was a disciple of the Qinsang school. What was the use of kidnapping her? He was clearly looking for an excuse to pick a fight. However, the 10 sects of the profound sects had always been at odds with the Chongyue True Temple. Every year, there would be conflicts between the disciples of the Eastern Sea, and they would even fight. In the open sea, strength was always respected. If you were strong, then who would care about what you did? Reasoning wouldn't work here, so he didn't find it strange that Zhang Yan did this. He just felt that the other party was only a disciple of the profound light realm and was overestimating himself. Chapter 171. Hearing what Zhang Yan said, the old man laughed loudly and said, "What an arrogant junior. Even the 18 demon kings of my Chongyue Truth Temple don't dare to provoke us casually in the outer endless sea. You still want to fight the prodigies of my sect? You have to get past me first." His eyes lit up and he stared at Zhang Yan. "I, Beigong Hao, am also a mystic light realm cultivator. Let me fight first today and see what's different about the disciples of Qinsang school." When Zhang Yan heard this, his expression didn't change. However, the sword pellet in his ancestral aperture actually emitted a trace of excitement. It faintly assumed a posture that was very different from before. Bei Gonghao laughed loudly and waved his hand. A beam of blue light rose from the bottom of his feet and swept him into the air. The beam of light was like a raging waterfall, rumbling like waves. It was an extraordinary sight to behold. Looking down from above, he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of gray gas. In an instant, the gas spread all over the top of the mountain. Then, he waved his hand and a flag flew out. He tossed it above his head and a flag gate as tall as a person appeared out of thin air. He sneered a few times and went into the flag gate, hiding his figure. This body-disappearing flag gate could protect his body within this magical treasure for 4 hours. As long as this flag gate was not destroyed, he would be safe and sound. His voice came from inside the flag gate. Junior, today, let me see the power of the yin-yang flying knife of my Chongyue Truth Temple. Chongyue Truth Temple didn't have many superior techniques like the 10 great sects of the Xian Gate. They only had one extremely powerful Xian art called Origin Yin-Yang Flying Knife. Once this knife was mastered, it could injure the spirit and cut off the head. It was almost as powerful as a flying sword. This was the reason why the temple dared to compete with the 10 great sects of the Xian Gate. What was even more dangerous was that this knife was formed from a ball of essence qi and was created according to one's will. Under the cover of the gray mist, it was even more difficult to defend against. Although Bei Gonghao had only managed to refine 5 flying daggers due to his limited cultivation, he was not afraid of any cultivators of the same generation other than core formation cultivators. He did not even bother to bring an extra magic treasure. Zhang Yan had been looking for an opening, but this Bei Gonghao was obviously experienced in setting up traps. His series of movements were flawless. Since that was the case, they might as well have 3 fair battles. Zhang Yan had heard of the formidability of the Origin Yin-Yang flying dagger. Rumor had it that this dagger could slay a person before they could even make a sound, and with a single strike, the body and spirit would be obliterated. Today, he finally had the chance to experience it. He was paying close attention and didn't know that a black saber was silently condensing in the surging gray mist around him. It was flickering behind him. After the saber circled a few times in the gray mist, it suddenly flashed like lightning and appeared behind Zhang Yan in the blink of an eye. It fiercely slashed at his neck. Before the edge of the saber reached him, a wave of cold air had already penetrated his skin and bones. However, at this moment, a sword ray flew out and with a chi sound cut the black saber. The two collided and immediately cut the saber ray into pieces. It turned into a ball of black gas that circled in place and then went back into the mist. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. He was surprised. It wasn't because the saber had come stealthily, but because after this sword ray appeared, he didn't need to use his will to control it. Even if it leaped out to protect its master, it would return after one strike and not move. But now, it did not return. Instead, it wandered around him, faintly protecting him. From time to time, it would make a sound as if it was demonstrating to the flying dagger. It was more agile and lively. It must be the result of the true consciousness becoming stronger. Inside the flag gate, Bei Gonghao was surprised and said in a low voice, "Junior, you're actually a sword cultivator. I've underestimated you." He was also shocked. If it was a normal cultivator, he wouldn't be afraid. But from the looks of it, it was clearly a sword cultivator who had cultivated true consciousness. It was impossible for a sneak attack to succeed. If he couldn't take down Zhang Yan in 4 hours, he would have nowhere to run when the flag gate closed and counterattacked. Even though he was currently seated within the array flag gate, his expression had turned a little more solemn. Originally, he only wanted to give Zhang Yan some face, and did not want to do anything to him. However, now that he felt that his life was in danger, his killing intent was truly ignited. He made up his mind and chanted an incantation. He used all his strength to activate the flying dagger technique. He must kill Zhang Yan on the spot. With Zhang Yan's full concentration, 4 black flying daggers appeared at the same time in this gray mist, attacking Zhang Yan from 4 different directions. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "How can you hurt me like that? He gave a clear shout and shook the sword pellet away. In a split second, 4 sword pellets appeared and slashed at the 4 flying knives without showing any weakness. Bei Gonghao was shocked when he saw that Zhang Jie was using a technique like light-splitting shadow. But he quickly calmed down. This yin-yang flying dagger was not just a technique to kill people. It also contained a very powerful knife technique. After hundreds of years of hard training, he was confident that he was not afraid of anyone of the same generation. This time Zhang Yan wanted to take the opportunity to train his true knowledge in the sword, and when he saw the saber ray leaping and leaping, unexpectedly displaying a set of brilliant saber skills, he was delighted to see it. He roused his spirits and took out his sword ball to fight with it. The two of them exchanged blows. Qi shot out and collided. But Bei Gonghao had been immersed in the yin-yang flying dagger technique for a long time and was indeed very exquisite. In comparison, his sword technique was even better than Zhang Yan's. If it was purely a competition of 4 sword pellets, Zhang Yan would be at a disadvantage. However, he also had his own methods. Every time the flying dagger found a gap, he would not care about it and split out another sword ray to shatter it. Then, he would continue to fight with 4 sword rays. He had the intention of using this person to hone his sword skills. At this moment, Mountain River Boy's voice resounded in Zhang Yan's mind, "Master, that saber qi borrows qi to take form. Even if it's shattered, it can be condensed again with a drop of Kuei water essence qi. Why don't I use the Mountain River Cloud Abyssal painting to absorb it and see how much essence qi he can use?" Zhang Yan smiled and communicated with Mountain River Child. He said secretly, "No hurry, this Kuei water essence is what I am looking for." This old man hides in the flag door. He is obviously very slippery and afraid of death. If he sees that I have collected the essence and have a way to restrain him, he probably won't fight with me anymore. Let me slowly find a chance to trick him out of the flag door. It won't be too late to deal with him then. After that, he quietly separated a sword shadow and flew to the flag door to ambush. After the two fought for an hour, Bei Gonghao became anxious and hid in the flag door. Even if Zhang Yan couldn't do anything to him, he also couldn't do anything to Zhang Yan. And he could clearly see that Zhang Yan still had a sword ray that was ready to be released at the critical moment to protect himself. According to the current situation, if he waited for the 4 hours of maintaining the flag door to pass, his figure would be exposed in front of Zhang Yan. At that time, he was even less confident. It was hateful that he usually only used the flying dagger to bully others and never used other magic weapons. He thought in his heart, if I can cultivate another flying dagger, I can kill this thief easily. Now it seems that I can only use that yang knife. The yin-yang flying dagger of origin had both yin and yang. When yin and yang worked together, it could display endless mysteries. If it was cultivated to a high level, it could transform into millions of yin-yang heavenly knives and fight with thousands of flying swords. However, up until now, Bei Gonghao had been using the yin knife to fight and the yang knife to hide. He was waiting for Zhang Yan to get used to the yin knife and then he would attack and kill him when he least expected it. Now that the situation was in a stalemate, if he didn't make a move now, he might not have the chance when the flag door's time limit was up. Therefore, he urged the yin knife a few more times and found a gap to break out of the encirclement. He went straight for Zhang Yan. As he expected, Zhang Yan released the protective sword ray to meet the knife qi. Bei Gonghao was waiting for this moment. His eyes focused and he immediately formed a spell. A white light suddenly flew out of the gray gas and slashed at Zhang Yan, who was completely defenseless. This saber was refined from the 9th water essence qi. It was fierce and sharp, hard to defend against, and fast. After a flash of white light, a cha sound was heard. Zhang Yan was cut into 2 and fell to the ground. Suddenly, blood gushed out like a fountain. Bei Gonghao couldn't help but be overjoyed. He laughed and couldn't wait to jump out of the flag door. But just as he took a step, a light flew out from the ground and his face stiffened. The cold light flew past his neck and he fell to the ground with his head separated from his body. A moment later, a panicked original spirit emerged from the headless body. It first looked around in confusion, then it was frightened and quickly jumped up, as if it wanted to escape. Zhang Yan's figure slowly appeared from not far away. When he saw the original spirit, he smiled and grabbed it, sucking the original spirit into his palm. Holding it in his hand, he teasingly said, "Fellow Taoist Bei Gong, where are you going?" Just now, he had used the true form to create a fake body to die in his place. If Bei Gong Hao had paid close attention, he would definitely have seen the flaw. But he was too eager to win and didn't know that Zhang Yan had already sent a sword ray to ambush him under the flagged door. He only took one step out and was killed on the spot. Bei Gong Hao was frightened out of his wits and begged, "Fellow Taoist, please spare my Yuanling. I'm willing to do anything for you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Oh. If that's the case, I think this Yin Yang Li Yuan flying knife is not bad. Is fellow Taoist Bei Gong willing to tell me the method?" Even if he didn't practice this method himself, he could still use it to exchange for treasures and methods. Since this person's original spirit had fallen into his hands and was still begging for mercy, then there was no harm in asking. Bei Gong Hao was a little hesitant. It wasn't that he was worried about the method being leaked. This method wasn't something that could be mastered overnight. Moreover, he only knew the first 3 stages of the method. Even if he gave it to someone else to practice, could it be stronger than the Chongyue True Temple? What he was worried about was whether Zhang Yan would really spare him after what he did. Zhang Yan was in no hurry to urge him. He was waiting for him to make a decision. At this moment, Mountain River Child said in his ear, "Master, I've already collected the Kuei water essence and the 9th water essence. I don't know if Bei Gong Hao still has them." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Slow down. I haven't collected the interest yet." He raised his hand and threw out the 9 absorption devil slip. As soon as the slip appeared, it was like a vicious shark that smelled blood. It scuttled towards Bei Gong Hao's corpse, circled a few times, and sucked the head and body clean. Then, it flew back into his sleeve. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.